The House now resumes its sitting. Senator Guevara.
Thank you very much,
Sorry,
Madam.
Senator Guevara, before you start, Senator... wait, sorry. I'm having a senior moment. Cowan. Senator Cowan has asked for leave to come back a little late. Yes, thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We move on to our second bill this afternoon, the Banking Amendment Bill 2026. Madam President, and this is another bill that is not contentious at all, Madam President, and I know that my colleagues on the other side would probably agree with me, Madam President, that it's not a contentious bill. What this bill does, Madam President, is that it replaces Part 12 of the Banking Act of 2015 with a more comprehensive legal framework for abandoned property, Madam President. And Clause 4 of the bill substitutes Part 12 of the Principal Act bearing the title Abandoned Property. And as a result, Part 12 now houses new sections 167 to 174C. Madam President, the new sections 167 to 170, it contains provisions with respect to what is an abandoned property and the type relating to accounts and other funds. Under the new section 167, property of a type described under subsection 1 are presumed to be abandoned after the passage of 10 years, Madam President, instead of 15. Subsection 2, Madam President, provides the circumstances under which property enumerated under subsection 1 will not be presumed to be abandoned, including an indication of interest in the property made by the owner to a licensed financial institution. Madam President, under the new section 168, a licensed financial institution is required to report and pay over abandoned property to the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. A reduction of interest or the levying of interest on abandoned property is restricted. Furthermore, Madam President, an abandoned property that is paid over to the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank ceases to accumulate any interest and liability for that abandoned property. It goes on to continue, Madam President, to say that existing abandoned property in the custody of the central bank and the attendant liability for that abandoned property is transferred to the respective member country under the new section 169. Madam President, what is important is that the central bank is now required to publish the aggregate value of the abandoned property that is being transferred to the member country, in this case, Antigua and Barbuda. Madam President, the new section 170, establishes the date on which the respective types of abandoned property are vested in the Crown and or the state. Particularly, Madam President, abandoned property of the type presumed abandoned under section 167(1) and paid into the custody of the central bank by virtue of section 168(1)(b vest in the Crown 5 years from the date on which it is to be paid into the central bank, Madam President. Madam President, under the new section 172, the minister shall sell the contents of the safe deposit box at public auction. You know, sometimes people keep their jewelry, whatever artifacts, things that are very precious to them within the safety box at financial institutions. Madam President, under the new section 172, the minister may sell the contents of the safe deposit box at a public auction only after making the requisite publication and notification to the owner of the safe deposit box within the stipulated time frame, Madam President. Madam President, there's also a new section 173, and it speaks about the proceeds of the sale of the safe deposits. They are placed in the abandoned property fund to the abandoned safe deposit liquidation fund, Madam President. And Madam President, it goes on and it details what exactly an abandoned property is. Madam President, this bill, Section 173, it speaks about the handling of proceeds of the sale of the deposit box and its contents. And what I really like about this bill, Madam President, it speaks about after the expenses are deducted. You know, when you're having these sales, you have to issue the notices, the mailing notices, etc. It's only after those expenses are deducted that the remaining funds will be available, Madam President. Madam President, 174 goes on to speak about the publication of abandoned property and notification, which is very important. Within 30 days after the end of the financial year, financial institutions, whether it is credit union and or banks, they must file a report to the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank on the Section 168(1)A and must report to the Minister on the Section 171(2). Madam President, it goes on to say, A, that there must be a published notice in the Gazette, whether in the newspaper for general circulation and or on website, because you know now we no longer print newspapers, so we get newspaper articles circulated all around via social media, and it's at the tip of our fingerprints, Madam President. Or B, send a notice by mail or by any method of communication specified in an account mandate to the owner's last known address. Subsection 2, Madam President, a notice under subsection 1 must state 1, the name of the owner, 2, the particulars of the abandoned property, and C, Madam President, that if a transaction is not effected with respect to the property within 30 days of the notice, Madam President, the property will be paid or delivered without further notice, Madam President. So, Madam President, this bill is not contentious at all, Madam President. What we're really doing is that we're replacing Part 12, and only, Madam President, because I know we like to reference previous act and acts before and so on and so forth, Madam President, but this bill is just a repeal and substitution of Part 12 of the Banking Act of 2015 with a more comprehensive legal framework for abandoned property. And so, Madam President, with these few words, Madam President, this is a self-explanatory bill. It is only repealing, Madam President, and substituting Part 12 of the Banking Act of 2015. And so with these few words, Madam President, I commend this bill to this Honorable House, if it pleases you.
Madam President, I second the motion and reserve the right to speak.
Thank you, Senator Rain. Senator, oh my goodness, Azil.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I wish to make a brief presentation to this debate on the Banking Amendment Bill 2026. I note with much interest that the leader of government business likes to preface her presentation with the suggestion that the bills are non-contentious. Well, that she thinks they should not be non-contentious. In fact, I believe that whenever we bring a piece of legislation to the House, it is never perfect legislation, and there's always an opportunity to advance arguments for how such a piece of legislation can in fact be improved and bettered in the interests of Antigua and Barbuda. So I believe all of our efforts in this House, as rancorous as it may get, all aids in just achieving that, bringing to the House, to the members of the House, the recognition that the bill can in fact be improved in several ways. On the face of it, Madam President, I would agree that in this case it appears to be a far more comprehensive legislative framework for treating with the issue of abandoned property that are held in commercial banks. In fact, when you consider that for 15 years, our commercial banks tend to retain on their books funds that are not theirs, and certainly it serves the purpose of propping up their asset base. But in fact, these are monies that, by popular practice, should be moved to the central bank, and personally, I am pleased to see that we are reducing the length of time that it spends on the books of our commercial banks from 15 to 10, because in fact, what it represented was a subsidy of sorts for our commercial banks, that they would continue to hold on to these funds for 15 years. So yes, Madam President, the principle that the money must move, that it must be accounted for, reported and transferred to the ECCB in a timely manner, this case being 10 years, is something that I am personally satisfied with. When, in fact, when I consider what obtains in other jurisdictions, I note that there are several jurisdictions that are far more aggressive in their approach to having commercial banks hand over the abandoned property. Some range from 3 years to 5 years, and so this 10 years, I think, strikes a healthy balance, so that we give owners of those properties, and in fact the estate, anyone who may be able to make a claim on their estate, adequate time to do so. Madam Chair, Madam President, I want to draw the attention of this House to the fact that in our regulation, in this particular bill, Madam Chair, the state that is administering the abandoned property and the state that is confiscating that abandoned property is clearly defined. And I'm happy because, you see, confiscation suggests a particular punitive action. Madam Chair, the action of confiscating or simply seeking to administer the abandoned property. And so the fact that we have placed such a great emphasis on notification, that notification mechanism, I think, is absolutely important, because lest we fall into the false notion of thinking that monies that have been left on accounts for several years is really an indication that the citizen, for whatever reason, might have left it for whatever reason, or might have experienced some demise that would not permit them to pay attention to their assets. Madam Chair, Madam President, forgive me, my previous life keep calling back to Madam Chair. Madam President, in this case, some of these forgotten accounts represent accounts that were opened by some persons perhaps 30 years ago, 25 years ago, who for whatever reason might have emigrated to another state. Accounts that might have been opened by family members who perhaps did not advise of a family of its existence. And so it would be reasonable to accept that a comprehensive and very aggressive notification process is employed, so that there is no alienation from that particular asset, Madam President. So I'm very pleased with this particular provision. The reality is, though, that when you look at the current standard for the 10 years, I get the sense that we're operating what I would call, Madam President, a sort of bifurcated system as it relates to the asset, the accounts, and the safety deposit box. Because in our case, the accounts are being deemed to be abandoned after 10 years, whereas the safety deposit boxes, the contents of the safety deposit boxes, are considered to be abandoned after 5 years. And my question is, why did we not give consideration to creating a standard time period for the determination of these whether it be safety deposit boxes and accounts, as being abandoned. So I think that this sort of bifurcated system that we are setting up here could have been strengthened by allowing there to be an across-the-board 10-year period, because at the end of the day, Madam President, you could accept that some of these safety deposit boxes contain wills, they contain title deeds, they contain family heirlooms, many of which are really priceless and irreplaceable. And so therefore every effort should be made to preserve their ownership. In fact, when you consider the abandonment, what constitutes the abandonment of the safety deposit box, it is really upon the 5 years after the expiration of the lease. It does not speak to whether or not the previous leaseholder might have communication with the bank on other matters, and so therefore the deposit box in itself should not be determined to be abandoned, because the customer may still be very much engaged with other elements of banking business. And so I would imagine that a 10-year period would be just, or should be just, create a sense of equity across both systems. One of the things that I note, Madam President, is the creation or the establishment of an abandoned safe deposit box liquidation fund under the administration and control of the minister, as is outlined in section 173, subsection 1 of the bill. And my question here to the leader of government business would certainly be to determine whether or not this fund has in fact been established, because I note that we are referencing the 2015 Act. And in the principal Act, Madam President, there is the creation of that fund, and so I think it would be proper for the leader of government business to tell us whether or not that particular fund has in fact already been created, and whether any concrete arrangements, if any, has been put in place to ensure the proper administration of this particular provision upon the commencement of this act. So I trust that in her wrap-up, the leader of government business may be able to speak to that particular issue. Interestingly, Madam President, Section 174B tells us that the funds that are vested in the Crown will be held in a special reserve fund, and it will be used for strategic, let me ensure that I'm referencing it correctly, it will be used for strategic economic development initiatives approved by the Monetary Council. And this is where I have a problem, Madam President, not with the intent, but again, the language I think is a little vague, because it lends itself to any and everything. In fact, I heard the Honorable Prime Minister in one of his radio appearances suggesting that we now have a total somewhere in the region of about $50 million sitting and presumably abandoned in our regional banks, and that those funds should be used for investment purposes. And in fact, he was very specific in noting that these funds could perhaps be used for an OECS air as a dedicated sub-regional carrier. Now I really cringed at that suggestion, Madam President, because you see, at the end of the day, these funds remain the property of individuals. And I don't think that it is the government's right to simply have the thing and use the thing where they may and where and how they may deem necessary. Madam President, in fact, some of the best practices I've seen in jurisdictions such as the UK, where those funds are held into perpetuity. So there is no alienation of those funds. There's never a point where the owner or their estate cannot claim those funds even after they would have been vested in the Crown, or the central bank as we have it here, and then the Crown. So, Madam President, I am concerned about this suggestion. I would imagine that we would have learned our lesson from the history of Liat 1974 Limited and the demise that it experienced, and certainly that our leaders around the sub-region would give absolutely no consideration to a suggestion like that. In fact, I would imagine, and perhaps some may argue that, well, you're arguing that it should not be touched, and on the other hand, you're saying this, but I'm suggesting here that if it is in fact going to be touched when vested in the Crown, that it should serve the purpose of engaging in real and tangible developmental projects that could bring about changes in the lives of the people of Antigua and Barbuda. And I point immediately to improving our healthcare infrastructure. I point immediately to improving our education infrastructure. Madam President, rather than this funny claim, because you see, the thing is, and I'm hearing the attempt at distraction, but the thing is, when our leaders are inclined on taking a particular course of action, they tend to, as is normally the case, they tend to put the feelers out there to see whether or not there's public appetite for it. Hence the reason why I'm addressing that particular suggestion by the Honorable Prime Minister. Madam President, when we consider that these funds would have been earned through the hard work of our citizens, we want to be particularly careful in ensuring that they are not dumped into that black hole. Madam President, further, the issue of the safety deposit box, Madam President, is something that I would wish for this House to give consideration to. And I understand that when we come to this place, it almost appears as if there is absolutely no opportunity to amend anything that comes to this Senate. Certainly, that may not be the reality in law, but that is certainly how we seemingly behave in practice. But I would imagine that this bill could have been improved significantly, Madam President, if we were to create, as I mentioned earlier, that sort of equitable arrangement that would allow the period of abandonment to be determined as 10 years for the safety deposit box, in much the same way that it is with the accounts, Madam President. And so with those few words, I would thank you for the opportunity to make a contribution to this bill, Madam President, if it pleases you. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Guevara, I don't see anybody else interested. Senator Parker.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I want to align myself with the position shared by Senator Azil, and just to highlight three things. While I agree with him and was also happy to see the section 17.4 in relation to abandoned property and note.
What was that clause again?
17.4, publication of abandoned property and notification. 174. I forgot my glasses today.
Oh, 174.
Sorry.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, my issue here is I find that it did not properly say how many times the customer should be in receipt of notification. I think that that is a gap. Now, it does say that you are to publish a notice in the Gazette, a newspaper of general circulation, and on its website. Is that a one-off? Do you do it one time and you're done? It does say that you should send a mail, right, and any other method of communication. I accept that as well, but do you send one email, and if people miss it, they miss it? I think that this particular clause needed to be a little bit more robust and specific in the law. I also, at C, subsection 2C, had an issue with the 30 days. So that is the 30 days. The 30 days in subsection 2C. So it is basically saying that after you meet the 10-year or 5-year, and I agree with Senator Ashworth that 10 years is a threshold that we should keep throughout the bill, but it is saying that once you meet that and a notice goes out, you have only 30 days to come forward and claim your property or your money. And I think that is highly inadequate for some of the reasons Senator Ashworth would have pointed out. Generally, people don't live here. You know, they come and go back to the island at certain times, or family members may not be aware. I remember there was a publication concerning me in the newspaper a few years ago for some property that I have, and I never saw it. Never saw it. And the bank said that they had published it several times. And because, and because we're such a small community, you would think that I didn't see it, but somebody said, hey, look at my name in the paper for XYZ. It never happened. And I would like us to look at that 30 days. I don't think it is realistic, and I don't think it is fair. I think that presents a little risk. I had 90 days as a proposed suggestion, but my 90 days is really as well not based on anything. But, you know, it is a 3-month, and I think that we should specify the amount of notices and publication. The bank must do its utmost best to reach that depositor or that person that has their property in safekeeping. And let me tell you, Madam President, which leads me to my other point, okay? What section is that? Which is section 174B. The reason why I'm saying the threshold for the notices and the effort of the banking or financial institution has to be greater, even than when they will be invested to the central bank, is because we're now changing the legislation for government to get this property. And that is a higher threshold. Government should ensure that any financial institution has exhausted and overturned every single possible avenue to reach people. Why? Because we're dealing with the crown, and it is a different standard. Now, when monies, which is traditionally, I'm a former banker, would have been transferred to central bank, it is under the understanding that the central bank is a regulatory authority set up for particular purposes, and so the monies are transferred there, whether it's for safekeeping, safeholding, whatever. But when you're moving that now from the central bank and making government, right, acquiring that property, it's a totally different ball game because you're dealing with the crown. And that brings me to 174B, which the good senator here also highlighted in terms of the use of the property. And immediately, because we spoke about it in our last debate, what jumps up at me here is section 9(1) of the Constitution, and whether or not that would be in conflict. Because whether we pass a nice rosy piece of legislation or not, it is still compulsory acquisition of property. It is still government, which is my point, it's not the regulatory authority. It is still government intruding in that private space to take that, whether it's money, whether it's after 50, could be after 100 years. It is still compulsory acquiring that. And the Constitution is very clear in section 9(1) that no property of any description shall be, and no interest in or right to or over property of any description shall be compulsory acquired except for public use. That is the constitutional standard. It's a very high standard, right? And it goes on to say, and then it makes the condition that except for the payment of fair compensation within reasonable time. Madam President, the government is moving to compulsory acquire people's property, right? And they're seeking a legislative framework to do it. I believe that Section 17B4 contravenes the Constitution, where it says that it can be used to finance strategic economic development initiatives approved by the Monetary Council. I do not think that that is congruent with the high bar that the Constitution has set, which says that it has to be in the interest for public use, and that it is public use. But these things again, Madam President, let me speak to you, have been tried and tested in the court of law. It's not just that it is a good intent, or the government has decided we need to build a park because children need a playground, which is great, and the whole country can agree with that, and that would be money being used for a public use. But in the framework of the Constitution and compulsory acquisition, which has been tested legally over and over, the public use is at a higher bar in terms of you need that particular property to satisfy a particular public use. And what I'm asking is for the drafters and others to apply their mind and their thoughts. And by the way, as a former banker, and I have spoken to other bankers on this, and they have the same concerns, okay? Now, I am seeing that government is here thinking all of this money, I don't know what the figure is, goes to the central bank, and this is money, as Senator Ashworth has said. The Prime Minister has voiced his stream of thought out loud that, you know, the country can use this money to do this, that, and the other. And it is for that reason, it is enshrined in the Constitution, that so that government can't just look from people things and think they can come and take it because I can make a better use of it. Cannot be. So it's a higher threshold, and I will repeat for the record that I am of the firm belief that 174B right, may not be congruent with that constitutional provision. The last thing I would like to highlight is Section 174A, which is claims to abandoned property. And I am also happy that this bill makes allowance and appreciates that there might be a gap between the information getting to people. So I am happy to see that persons still have the right to file a claim to get back their property. If they have a right, Madam President, you are a lawyer, whether, you know, by trust or by will, or, you know, having control of the estates of persons who are deceased, that they can step forward and claim it when they realize that it is gone. Now, this section links back to, what section it say? Well, it really says that you have 10 years in which to do that. So that after 10 years, after the government has acquired property, after 10 years and 1 day or 10 years and a month, you no longer have a right. Your right is destroyed. I do not agree with that. I don't agree with that. If government acquires the property, number one, if a timeline is needed for people to come forward for the property, which I don't think, that even if it is 20 years from now, because that child has come of age, or whatever, the trust is now vested, etc., they have a right to that property. It is theirs. Government, by virtue of stepping in and getting it, you know, within the time frame that they have set, should not destroy that right to that property, whether it is mine or my children or my children's children. And it is government. And because government is continuous, government owes the rightful owner of that property, I believe. However, Madam President, I will take guidance and direction. And so if there is need for a cap because government feel they cannot just be hanging in limbo, and I don't agree. But that is the rationale behind of it. The cap still, in my view, cannot be 10 years. It's highly unreasonable. Highly unreasonable. And I think that that should be revisited, if it pleases you, Madam President.
Senator Hughes.
Madam President, I will not go into the points that were raised by my colleagues, but I would want to, my area of concern with the bill is really that of the properties within the safety boxes. Right? I'm very much concerned about that because I want to re-emphasize some of the points that Senator Azil, who led the debate on this matter on this part on our behalf. You know, Madam President, there's some people who save a lot. They save their life savings and they put it aside. And it's expected that their generations are the ones who are going to benefit from it. And my concern with the bill is how these assets in the safety deposit boxes are disposed of. That's my concern, how they're being disposed of by auction. And Madam President, it brought to mind the whole debacle of what happened with the Alfa Nero and all the legal challenges to property and all the concerns then, right? And this is people's property. And when you talk about, you don't know, there's some wealthy people, Madam President, who have things in the safety boxes that they know it's there, and they may be overseas, because we have persons who are very wealthy that keep assets here in the banks, right? And they've been there for quite a while. One of my challenge, Madam President, right, this bill becomes law right away after it's ascended by the Governor General once we've passed it here. What is the timeline? Is it 10 years from the passage of the bill or 10 years onto the passage of the bill when it becomes active? That's my concern too, Madam President. Maybe you could help me in that way because I've not understood it. I don't see when it becomes effective. Is it that the 10 years, and the legal draftspersons could help me along the way, is it 10 years after we've passed this bill now that this becomes active if you have property in the bank that you have not claimed? Or is it 10 years running? When does the 10 years start to run is my concern. Maybe the leader of government business could assist me, or the legal draftspersons could assist me with this. When does that period for sale of assets start to run? Because I don't really see it here, Madam President. I don't know if you could help me, if you have picked it up in the bill or in the administration of the bill. Pardon? No, I wait for you to explain that. Right? I wait for you to think. It's not about being retroactive. The account currently, my concern is if there's a dormant account now. If there's a dormant account now. So there's a dormant account now. And the bank is saying that I'll send this to the central bank because it's dormant. Right? What happens?
Fix it. The law takes effect. Yes, because the law is already in operation. Right.
I'm saying the law passed tomorrow. Just clarify that for me when you get up, Madam Thing. The legal draftspersons could help me when we go into committee stage for me to have a better understanding and for the wider public to have a better understanding as to how the operationalization of this bill is going to take place. All right? So that is my concern there, Madam President. And not only that, the question too of, I raised it earlier, how you're disposing of the assets through the auction. You would then have, Madam President, we have a society that sometimes people know what's going to be sold before they know it's going to be sold. You understand the kind of gymnastics. I don't want to go into too much detail. And then there's an organized, because there are certain rules with auctions where, you know, the auction is a certain day, but a few people know about it. And is it a closed auction, public auction, you know, different types of auction? Then, you know, those are some of the concerns that I have. Those are some of the concerns I have, that Brother Lammy Newton might have an interest in something, a piece of metal or gold, and Brother Lammy Newton is not even aware that the bank is going to sell that interest, or the interest is up for sale. Right? We have to be careful, because we have insider trading. We have a lot of insider trading in society. Right? And we have to be careful with insider trading when it comes to the disposition of people's assets. Right? Yes, it's a public auction, but only Philip Shaul and Chester Hughes, Senator Philip Shaul and Senator Chester Hughes know about the auction, because it's in the paper, but we don't prepare for the amount and the auction. You understand what I'm saying, my brother? So we have to be very careful of insider trading. All right? And that's my concern, Madam President. Protection from insider trading and all the lot. I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, Madam President.
Okay, Senator Guevara.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Oh, I'm happy that it was not a contentious bill at all. But, Madam President, it cannot be retroactive. If the bill is passed today, it's gazetted and so forth, then it starts from whenever, next week, tomorrow. It cannot be, you cannot include the 10 years from last year, Madam President. Madam President,
Point of order, Madam President. I want to direct, sorry. It's a Lucy, it's just to, yeah. Clarify, well, you know, since we're using misleading, if that's the point of order for the whole morning, that one.
I'm sorry?
Misleading the public.
She's misleading the public by saying
that
it's not retroactive?
Yes.
How is that misleading? Is it in the legislation that is retroactive?
Yes.
Where?
Section 5, transitional. As my leader was speaking, I tried to point it out to him, the question he was asking. 174C, sorry. So it says, we're on the commencement of this act.
It's not 174C, it's Bill Clause 5 of the bill. Clause only 170, 167 to 174C is comprising Clause 4 of the bill, which deals with abandoned property. So we are referring to Clause 5.
So I just wanted to clarify that for her. She can reference it, as I tried to do for my leader when he mentioned it, which I think is a solid point, but it was clarified in that clause. And the word is really not retroactive, but it says that it commences immediately. And so any dormant, at the time of this, once it's there for 10 years after this bill is passed, it qualifies.
It's not retroactive, it's saying that those that already qualify for the 10-year period as it is now, I think now it's 15 years, so now that they've already 10 years, then it applies. But it's a good point for clarification.
Right, so I'm saying the language is really not retroactive,
Yes.
because he wasn't really speaking of retroactivity either. But I think we all can be, yeah. Thank you.
Right, and also in subclause 2, it speaks to apply the application of those provisions to properties that are already deemed abandoned. So the clarification is noted. clarification. Your light isn't illuminated.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I noted that Senator Parker was inquiring as to what happened if the person is aggrieved. Section 174A, subsections 3 to 7 speak specifically about that. So any person, and I'll just read it, any person claiming an interest in any abandoned property paid into the custody of the central bank under section 168(1)(b, transferred to Antigua and Barbuda under section 169(1), or vested in the crown under section 171, may file a claim for that interest by a claim form supported by the affidavit evidence. And I really like this, right? So it's giving you an opportunity. Right, okay. And it goes on to say, Madam President, about what the claim forms includes. And I really like Section 7. Any person who feels aggrieved by a decision of the central bank or the minister may commence an action in the High Court to establish his or her claim within 30 days following the decision of the central bank or minister. So, Madam President, this is a straightforward bill, Madam President, and I noted that they were asking about, what would the funds use for economic growth? I mean, we don't know. I mean, we may have another COVID, infrastructural development to improve our healthcare system, maybe the expansion of the University of the West Indies Five Islands campus. Education is now free. I'm not speaking specifically, but these are the things. The government would not take the funds and just do willy-nilly with it. It's really for the economic development of Antigua and Barbuda, Madam President. So, Madam President, with these few words, this is really a more comprehensive legal framework, and we are really replacing and repealing Section 12 of the Banking Act of 2015. So with these few bills, Madam President, we are very proactive government. We want to ensure that we have legislation in place to protect all. And so if it pleases you, Madam President, I fully support this bill in its entirety.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill shortly entitled Banking Amendment Bill 2026 be read a second time. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. I believe the ayes have it. The bill will now be read a second time. Madam Clerk.
An act to the Banking Act 2015, number 10 of 2015, and for other incidental and connected purposes.
The bill now stands. Need to find Sarge. Not even Sarge believed we were going to finish this bill so quickly. The bill now stands referred to Committee of the Whole House to be considered clause by clause.
Clause 1, short title.
Question is that Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it.
Clause 2, interpretation.
The question is that Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it.
Clause 3, amendment of Section 2, interpretation.
The question is that Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it.
Clause 4, repeal and substitution of Part 12, abandoned property.
The question is that Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it.
Clause 5, transitional.
The question is that Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it.
The enacting clause.
The question is the enacting clause stands part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it.
And the title.
The question is that the title stands part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The House will now resume its sitting. Senator Gavaya.
I am pleased to report that the Banking Amendment Bill 2026 has passed through the committee stage without amendments, and I move the adoption of the report of the committee on the bill.
I have a seconder.
Second the motion, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Rain. It has been moved and seconded that the report of the committee on the bill be adopted. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Senator Gavaya.
Madam President, I'd like to move that the bill shortly entitled, the Banking Amendment Bill 2026, be read a third time and passed accordingly.
A seconder.
Second the motion, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Rain. It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Banking Amendment Bill 2026 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The bill will now be read a third time. Madam Clerk.
An act to the Banking Act 2015, number 10 of 2015, and for other incidental and connected purposes.
The bill has been read a third time and passed accordingly. Senator Gavaya.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Our third bill on the agenda, the Antigua and Barbuda Citizenship by Investment Amendment Bill 2026. Madam President, this is a very important bill, Madam President. What this bill represents is another significant milestone in the continuous strengthening of one of our most important economic programs, Madam President, the Citizenship by Investment Program. It reflects, Madam President, that our government, we are committed to continuous improvement, strong governance, Madam President, and maintaining international confidence within the program, Madam President. We all know, Madam President, the importance of the Citizenship by Investment Program and how it has contributed significantly to our national development, whether it is funding critical infrastructure, improving our healthcare and educational system, supporting social programs, strengthening our public finances, Madam President, and overall just enhancing our country's resilience. However, Madam President, protecting this Citizenship by Investment Program, Madam President, we ought to ensure, and especially based on how things are going now and how the world is evolving, we have to ensure that we have the legislative framework in place to avoid any emerging risk and to ensure that we continue to practice the best international standards. Madam President, these amendments to the Citizenship by Investment Bill 2026 should not be viewed as reactive measures, Madam President, but they are deliberate product of policy decisions aiming to ensure, Madam President, that Antigua and Barbuda remains at the very forefront of good governance within the global investment industry, Madam President. You see, our government, and this is not the first time since the Gaston Brown-led administration has come to this Honorable House making these amendments, Madam President, because we want to ensure that not only Antigua and Barbuda and or regionally, but that the rest of the world, they have confidence in our Citizenship by Investment Program. Madam President, and there are some key measures within this legislation that we are taking, Madam President, to ensure that we strengthen the program, Madam President. And the first one, Madam President, is Section 2H, Special Audit of the Unit by the Authority, which is very important, Madam President, and it reads, Section 1 on Section 2H, pursuant to Section 2G, the authority may initiate a special audit of the unit where A, significant irregularities or adverse audit findings reoccur in 2 or more of the unit cycles, B, credible information or complaints suggest systematic governance failures or corruption, C, the unit fails to submit an annual report within 6 months of the due date without a valid justification, Madam President, or D, there is a material security, financial, or reputational risk to the regional regulatory framework, Madam President. Madam President, 2I, we're putting all these mechanisms in place to safeguard our Citizenship by Investment Program. The reports to the authority. The auditor, Madam President, appointed by the authority to conduct a special audit shall immediately report to the authority in writing if at any time, Madam President, the auditor has reason to believe that 1, there exist circumstances which are likely to affect materially the ability of the unit to exercise its function under this Act and pursuant to the agreement. B, Madam President, material defects in the accounting records, internal controls, and records of the unit. C, Madam President, any inaccuracies or omissions from any documents or financial information submitted by the unit to the authority. D, any defects in the system for ensuring the safe custody of all documents and accounting records of the unit, or E, considers that the board, Madam President, we're holding the board accountable and responsible. So if the board, Madam President, has failed to respond to any of the recommendations made by the auditor appointed under Section 2E. So if the auditor brings something and the auditor makes the recommendation and the board fails to institutionalize it, Madam President. Madam President, these are the strong measures that we're putting in place to ensure that we safeguard the Citizenship by Investment Unit. Madam President, it also goes on to speak about establishing meaningful residency and genuine links. Subsection 4A speaks about 1, the unit or other component authority shall ensure that a main applicant and each dependent of the main applicant, name in the application of the main applicant, to whom citizenship is to be granted, commits to establishing a genuine and effective link to Antigua and Barbuda through the fulfillment of residency and integration obligations by the main applicant. Madam President. So, Madam President, we are putting all the necessary measures in place to ensure that we safeguard the citizenship by investment program. I'll go on to Section 5, Madam President, that whoever is applying for the citizenship, Madam President, under the Citizenship by Investment Program, during the first year, Madam President, they must spend at least 5 days in Antigua and Barbuda, and throughout the 5 years, Madam President, they must spend a total of 30 days, Madam President. Madam President, the bill goes on to speak about, and what I really, really love, is the Eastern Caribbean Citizenship by Investment Database. So, St. Kitts, St. Lucia, you know, these Eastern Caribbean countries, Grenada, Dominica, you know, because these are the 5 inclusive of Antigua, are the countries that has the Citizenship by Investment Program. I mean, they call it different names, but it's still the same thing, Madam President. And what I really love about it, Section 5A, the Eastern Caribbean Citizenship by Investment Database. So we're doing everything, Madam President, to protect this program, the credibility of it, Madam President. And Madam President, you know, I know the opposition will say they're the ones that introduce it, but we're the one that ensures that it's managed properly, Madam President. Because as they would say, government is continuous, and we were happy to ensure that this program is managed properly. And lest we forget, you know, I could never forget when Prime Minister Brown was in opposition, contrary to his other colleagues, he actually supported, at the time, as the wise man he is, he supported the Citizenship by Investment Program. He did. So this is not new. At the time, of course, he was in opposition, you know, I mean, so he couldn't bring the legislation to this Honorable House, but he supported it. And this is why, as the caring and responsible government we are, led by the Honorable Gaston Brown, we are ensuring, Madam President, that we put measures in place to safeguard this program. This program is very important to us, Madam President. It is very important to us. And I really like the sharing of the regional database, and this is, of course, Madam President, to improve due diligence. And it goes on to say, 5A1, the Eastern Caribbean Citizenship by Investment Database shall serve as the authoritative region for all data related to the program. Here's what the primary purpose of the database is, Madam President, according to Section 2, A to D. A, it strengthens the regional and international security by centralizing the data of the main applicants and their dependents named in the applications of the main applicant. B, support enhanced due diligence, risk assessment, and intelligence sharing functions in the state. C, ensures uniformity and transparency in the administration of the program. So this is not exclusively to Antigua and Barbuda alone, but all of the Eastern Caribbean countries that has this program. We're putting every mechanism in place to ensure that we safeguard and protect this program, Madam President. Madam President, Section 5D, it goes on to speak about, because some may ask, okay, so what about the confidentiality of data sharing and this database, you know, who accesses it, at what point, right, Madam President? So access, use, and security, Section 5D, 1, the unit shall ensure that access to the database is strictly limited to, Madam President, authorized personnel only, an individual of the CARICOM impacts, the designated competent authorities, and C, persons lawfully authorized under bilateral or multilateral arrangements for the purpose of security vetting or law enforcement cooperation. So everyone would not have access to this database, Madam President. Madam President, the legislation goes on to speak about data protection and confidentiality. Section 5E. 1, the unit shall ensure that all data stored in the database are classified and confidential and subject to national and regional data protection laws. So none of us can just go and access data and information just like that, Madam President. Madam President, I really love Section 6 of Section 5H, Madam President, where it speaks about, because sometimes, you know, and our oppositions like to say it, and I've heard them saying in this house, oh, politicians and ministers get involved and dictate, you know, Madam President. But I really love this section, where the unit and our board or the competent authority, so it's not restricting only to the board, but whoever the competent authority is, Madam President, fails to implement the action plan, the board of directors of the authority may, having regard to the nature and impact of the continued non-compliance on the sustainability, integrity, and reputation of the program, recommend to the council the imposition of one or more of the following proportional remedies. A, Madam President, the reduction of the annual maximum number of approved applicants, which would really affect our income to the Citizenship by Investment program. And nobody wants that. You don't want to ever be told that you only can have, let's say, maybe 10 or 15 applicants to the program. No, Madam President, once you fulfill the requirements and you are eligible, we want to ensure that there are more applicants. The more applicants that come in is the more revenue into the Citizenship by Investment program, and the more money that we can utilize for the development of Antigua and Barbuda. You know, whether it's improving our infrastructure, our roads, our healthcare system, our education, schools, you know, and we have seen, because the Citizenship by Investment unit has filed, you know, their financial statements many times in this house, and we have seen it. So we see exactly, I can't remember when the last time, but I'll verify in my wrap-up for you, but it has come before this house. I have seen it, so I can say without fear that it has come before this house. I can't say specifically when last, but it has come before this house, and we have seen it. You know, the check numbers, the details in terms of where the money would have been spent accordingly, Madam President. So I really, really specifically admire this clause, Madam President. Madam President, it goes on to speak about the qualifications and general requirements and procedures for citizenship by investment. And, Madam President, this legislation is one that is needed. We have seen all of the challenges and the concerns about visa, and, you know, some would think all of the speculations that we hear, you know, thinking that the program is as a result of what is happening. And every country is affected. You know, it's not only Antigua and Barbuda alone. So whenever we make mention of, oh, it's because of our Citizenship by Investment program, Antigua and Barbuda, this is an Eastern Caribbean. And this is what I admire, Madam President. So we're working with the rest of the Eastern Caribbean countries like St. Lucia, Grenada, St. Kitts, and Dominica that has the Citizenship by Investment program within their respective countries, Madam President, to ensure that we have the legislation in place. You see, Madam President, we are very responsible and compliant government. And so this legislation, Madam President, it serves as a framework to ensure that we protect this very important program, Madam President. We understand this is a national asset to all of Antiguans and Barbudans, Madam President, and what we want to ensure is that this program, Madam President, continues to generate sustainable benefits for current and future generations. And what we are doing here today with this legislation is to position Antigua and Barbuda, Madam President, among the world's best governed citizenship by investment program, Madam President. So with those few words, Madam President, I commend this bill wholeheartedly to this Honorable House, and it's a compliance bill. It's ensuring, and I know my colleagues on the other side, as the introducers of this bill that is managed so well by the Antigua-Barbuda Labour Party government, Madam President, I can't see that they will object to bill that they brought to this Honourable House, Madam President. So with those few words, I commend this bill to this Honourable House, and I fully support it, if it pleases you.
Madam President, I second and reserve the right to speak.
Thank you, Senator Ryan. Senator Warner.
Thank you, Madam President. I hope you're hearing me clearly from the... Fantastic. I rise to make my contribution to the Antigua and Barbuda Citizenship by Investment Amendment Bill of 2026. Now, Madam President, before I get into the substance of my contribution, it must be said that the establishment of this Eastern Caribbean Citizenship by Investment Regulatory Authority, quite a long name. I hope we can say ISARA. I think that's, I've heard some people describe it as such, so I'd have to say Eastern Caribbean Citizenship by Investment Regulatory Authority every time I refer to it. Is that all right, Madam President? Well, thank you very much. The authority, right. I think the interpretation also says authority. But yes, this bill, yes, we have no difficulty here with the establishment of that authority. As a matter of fact, this is something that we would wholeheartedly support on the opposition benches, that there ought to be a coordinated sub-regional approach to the management of our CBI programs across the OECS nations. That is very much needed. We would wholeheartedly and do wholeheartedly support the establishment of that authority. Now, Madam President, as well too, it is so important for us to understand the significance of the CBI program here to us in Antigua and Barbuda and even across the sub-region. The Citizenship by Investment program has been described, and don't take my words for it, Madam President. I take the words of the leader of government business, who said it was so fundamental to the continued economic development of Antigua and Barbuda. And again, just like how they gave credit where credit was due at the airport, and they praised the airport that was built by the United Progressive Party. Again, they are praising the Citizenship by Investment program established by the United Progressive Party administration, which seems now to be the savior of this Antigua Labour Party administration, Madam President. Not my words, but theirs. And to make it even, the emphasis even more so, that is not my words. Madam President, I refer to the Hansard of the meeting of the Lower House of Representatives held on the 30th of March of 2016. I want to read the words, Madam President, of the member for St. John City West, when this meeting, Madam President, was to debate the amendments to the Principal CBI Act of 2013. Now, I'm reading the words from the member of City West. We have to understand that the CIP program has been literally a lifesaver for this country. If it was not for the CIP program, many of the debts that are now up to date and are being serviced would not have been brought up to date. We would have still been struggling to make those payments. In fact, many of the initiatives that we would have undertaken would not have been doable without this initiative. So, Madam President, the point is clear. It goes even further. Well, I'll leave that for later. But the point is clear that the CBI program here in Antigua and Barbuda is fundamental at this point in time to our economic development. To give you some numbers as it relates to that as well too, I'm just setting the stage of how important this is, this debate that we're having here today. In the 2026 budget, Madam President, I'm talking about the recurrent and development estimates of 2026 that was passed by this Honorable House as well. Page 10, it says the citizenship by investment receipts are budgeted at $120 million. In 2025, it was budgeted at $120 million again. I go over to the Director of Audit reports for the different years just to give the people of Antigua and Barbuda the type of revenue that this kind of program generates. In 2020, we've seen $65 million, 2018, $59 million, 2017, $55 million, and 2016, just over $120 million. And those figures I read from the Director of Audit is just from the NDF investment category alone. So clearly, in a small country such as ours, where our total budget wouldn't really pass $4 billion, something that generates well over $100 million is so essential to the development of Antigua and Barbuda, again established by the United Progressive Party. But let's get to the management question, because that is what this bill describes, Madam President. And I'm going to go straight to, before we go into that, let us go to the interpretation of this bill. I have a question for the drafters, because page 2, is it page 2 or page 5? I'm seeing page 5 of the bill. It says the agreement and the ISARA agreement, and it says it's signed by the government of Antigua and Barbuda on 18 September 2026. I'm just asking a question if that was a typo. Typo we can just correct in the committee stage. Okay, fantastic. All right, so moving on now. As it relates to the management, Madam President, of the Citizenship by Investment Program, which is so important, and the leader of government business said that her government, the administration, has been the most transparent in terms of its management, has done a fantastic job, the program is the most integrity in the whole sub-region. Those are the words, and she's agreeing with me, the leader of government business. Now, I would have noted, Madam President, that Clause 5, right, entitled Insertion of New Sections 2E to 2J. I'm going to 2E, Accounts and Audit. The accounts of the board shall be prepared in the form and at the time the minister may direct. And it goes on to describe the accounts. Now, what I want us to understand in this Honorable House is to ask a question. Now, I would have asked the legal drafts people to tell me if in the current law that there is an audit requirement within the Citizenship by Investment Act. And I'm just waiting. I'm hoping they can, at any time, they can just let me know. But I also want to go on to say, Madam President.
What was the question again?
Pardon. If in the current law there is an audit requirement.
Did you read the current law?
Yes, I did. And that's what I'm getting to right now. So yes, and they can let me know if I'm erring astray. So in the current law, in the Principal Act in 2013, there was an audit requirement, right, Madam President? However, that was repealed in the amendment to the Principal Act in the year 2016, and I have that amendment in my hand here, Madam President, passed by both houses. And this is number 2 of 2016, the Antigua and Barbuda Citizenship by Investment Amendment Act of 2016. It reads as follows. The Principal Act is amended by repealing sections 2A to 2K and by repealing any other amendments to the Principal Act made by the Antigua and Barbuda Citizenship by Investment Amendment Act of 2014, number 7 of 2014. Now, clearly, Madam President, you go over and you realize that 2A to 2K, within that is 2J, and 2J of what was being repealed was the accounts and audit provision. That is why now, within this bill that is before the House, we're now reinserting the accounts and audit provision after it has been removed from the law for 10 years. I want us to understand that, Madam President. There was a requirement for the funds of the Citizenship by Investment Unit, the accounts of the unit, to be prepared and submitted to a Director of Audit or an auditor approved by the Director of Audit for the account to be audited. But that was removed from the law, repealed in 2016, and I'm still waiting to see if it was replaced because I couldn't find it. There are many amendments, Madam President, to the Citizenship by Investment Act, the Principal Act of 2013, and in none of them have I ever seen a replacement of that accounts and audit provision until today, 10 years after. Now, if it is that I just described before how important this program is to the economic development of Antigua and Barbuda, Madam President, and I would have taken the time to go through the budget estimates, to go through the Director of Audit reports with the inflows and outflows from the NDF, It's a special fund, so it's within the public accounts of Antigua and Barbuda. And we see the tens of millions, sometimes over $100 million brought in as a revenue every year. And you're telling me, Madam President, for a program that the leader of government business is saying has the most transparency, has the best accountability, and has the most integrity in the region, there is no accounts and audit provision currently in the bill, and we wonder why we're receiving such backlash, Madam President. Okay, yes, I continue, Madam President. So, and to make the matter even worse, the leader of government business, Madam President, would have mentioned that the Citizenship by Investment Unit, they are audited regularly, Madam President, and that those audits have been submitted and have even been brought before the Honorable House. I want to repeat what my minority leader said before, and they said we don't research, Madam President, we don't just get up and say things in this Honorable House. So when we say, oh, you're misleading and you're spreading misinformation, we speak on facts. So what did we do? I went to the Hansard records, Madam President. Again, I go over. Let me go to the Hansard that I start here. The same Hansard I mentioned, Madam President, on the 30th of March, 2016. That's the lower house sitting. And I quote from page 17 of that Hansard. It reads as follows, Madam President. In addition, Mr. Speaker, this is the member for St. John's City West. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we have here the audited financial statements ending December 31st, 2013 and December 31st, 2014 that were conducted by KPMG, and the 2015 accounts are being audited as we speak. So good. Under the UPP years, Madam President, we have audits in 2014. When the Labour Party first came into power, we have audits in 2015. But I'm sure the people of Antigua and Barbuda would be interested to know that this program that has the most transparency, the greatest accountability, and has the most integrity was not audited after 2016. That's 10 years, Madam President, of unaudited accounts. And how do I have that information? Those accounts were never tabled before Parliament prior to subsequently after 2016. They were never tabled. I went, Madam President, and I wrote to the Director of Audit myself to get a response. You say we can't just misrepresent and give misinformation, so we did the research. I wrote to the Director of Audit and I got back an answer, Madam President. The accounts of the CIU have not been audited by him post-2016. And he has received no audited statements by an auditing firm approved by him post-2016. This is 10 years, Madam President, of a failure to do the most basic step of financial accountability, as put in clause 5 of this bill before us, 2E. And I put before you, even if all that information, Madam President, was not convincing before, maybe this simple logic will be convincing. If 2E was already in the law, why would it need to be added in now? You're following that, Madam President? If something is already in the law, why add back in what is already there? And why repeal it in the first place? This is something that we have to understand. The CIU that we know has extra scrutiny upon it because of we're dealing with passports here, Madam President. So countries who we have the privilege of having visa-free access, whether it had been Canada, European Union countries, etc., they would put extra scrutiny on how we manage this program. And the first step in terms of financial accountability is how up-to-date are we with our auditing requirements, and we're not. Not only did we not do them, but they were removed from the law by the member for City West, who is the minister responsible, Madam President, for the functioning of that program. And he's also the Minister of Finance. I continue, Madam President. I'm going over now to page 7 of the bill before this Honorable House. And it says, okay, I just spoke about the annual independent financial audit. It also, and I'm happy with this other addition, Madam President, I must say. This is page 7 of the bill, 2E accounts and audit 2. The unit shall undertake or cause to be undertaken an annual independent financial audit and a biennial independent operational audit. Now that is so important, and I'm happy that it's included, an operational audit, to ensure that the program is operating or is being run as it was mandated to be run according to the law, Madam President. But I always have to put my hand on my head and question, will it be too late? Because we know why this bill is before this House. We know why the sub-region has been forced to come together and form this authority, the Eastern Caribbean Citizenship by Investment Regulatory Authority, because there has been pressure brought upon the OECS by the United States of America. There has been pressure brought upon the OECS by the European Union. The OECS countries who have citizenship by investment programs, they have been told, specifically by the EU, to phase out your programs by June 2028 or face the loss of visa-free access. So that is what has prompted this bill here, Madam President. And we also know that the OECS, rightfully so, and thankfully, they have come together and form a team to go and negotiate with the European Union to see what can be done about this. Because if we lose our CIP programs, what is going to happen to our economy? What is going to happen to our budgets? And this is what we have to have the foresight to see. We cannot just be wondering and looking at ways of how we can make sure we feel comfortable. Be transparent, open up your books. So why remove the audit requirement from the law? I continue, Madam President. I'm going to move over to the operational auditing side of things. This is now clause, well, the same clause actually, clause 5, 2E is still there. I'm now at 4. The audit shall assess, among other things, the compliance, I'm jumping down to B, compliance with the regulatory, legal, and operational requirements by the unit in relation to the program. Compliance with the regulatory, legal, and operational requirements by the unit in relation to the program. Let us look at that compliance, Madam President, because again, as it relates to the financial compliance of the CIU with audits and the submission of the accounts to be audited, that has been lacking, as verified by Hansard, as verified by the Director of Audit. So we have to now look over to the operational side of things. Now, Madam President, I turn our attention to the Principal Act, the Principal Act. I'm going to go over to Regulation 13(2)(f). This is not the, just bear with me, Madam President. I'm going over to the law. This is a law that's already been passed by both houses. This is the Principal Act, Antigua and Barbuda Citizenship by Investment Act, Regulation 13, okay, here we go, 2F. And I quote, Madam President, 6 monthly reports. 1, the reports referred to in Section 5 of the Act shall set out the information described in Subregulation 2 for the half year in each year starting on the 1st of January and the 1st of July, and shall be prepared within 14 days of the expiry of each half-year period. 2, the information contained in the reports referred to in Subregulation 1 shall include, and it gives a long list, but I don't want to bore everyone here, and you know, some of us are tired, so I'm going to jump right down to F. The name, this is it again, the information contained in the reports, the 6-month reports, shall include the name of the approved project, charitable organization, government-sponsored project, or business investment in respect of which payment was made to support each, the law is clear, each application, Madam President. I take my time to emphasize, I know what I'm doing, I'm not a crazy person. So I go over to the 6-month reports, Madam President, and you examine the 6-month reports published that the lead of government business, which she rightfully said, have been laid before this Honorable House time and time again. The question here is not an issue of if they were laid. The question is the contents of the report, and do they comply with the law, specifically Regulation 13 of the Principal Act. That is the question, and I'm focusing on F. Now, I'm going to jump straight now, Madam President, to the 6-month reports. And I don't believe I have to circulate these, because those as well, too, would have been brought before this Honorable House, laid before the House, circulated to all members, and it's available. They're all available online on the Citizenship by Investment Unit's website. Now, 2015, Madam President, there have been 20 reports, 20 reports published since the inception of the CIU to date. 26-month reports. And there's only one of the 20 reports comes close to what is mandated, not suggested, mandated in Regulation 13(2)(f), and that's 2015. And I'm reading from Appendix 8 of the Citizenship by Investment Unit 6-month report, Madam President, for 2015. And for those of you, I don't know if you're tech savvy enough to put it up that quickly, but if you're on the website, there's only following. The table, Appendix 8, is a table, and it has approved projects purchased. And that's the title of that column I'm reading. And I see here, these are the approved projects, Madam President: Tamarind Hills, Naples Development, Nonsuch Bay, Papaya, South Finger, Tranquility Bay, Jolly Harbor, Kalaluke, Veranda Estate. The words are a bit small, so just allow me. I will read those, leave those for now. And you have next to those approved projects the total purchase prices. So Tamarind Hills would have received $9.13 million in that 6-month period. And it goes on and on and on. Veranda Resort would have received $400,000 from the CIP program within that 6-month period. And it lists and it lists. Why is this so important, Madam President? How can you have a program, a citizenship by investment program, meaning people who invest receive citizenship and passports, Madam President? That is so sacred. So it must be, you must look after the program with the utmost care, responsibility, transparency, and accountability. And not since 2015 has any report, Madam President, listed the approved projects, charities, businesses, entities that have received money from the CIU program, the Citizenship by Investment program. Not one. I go through, Madam President, and to tell you, people might say, oh, suppose it just invested, the applicants to the program just invested through the NDF, because we all know you can just give a monetary contribution through the NDF and doesn't necessarily have to go directly to anything else. And that's how that's an investment category. But, Madam President, every report, I mentioned 20. We're talking about 19 others except for 2015. 19 out of the 20 would have mentioned that the other investment categories received applications which were approved, and they are not listed within the report. I read as follows: 2016, Madam President, real estate in that 6-month period from January to June got 20 applications. Business investment, 13 applications. So 13 times in the year of 2016, from the months January to June, 13 times businesses here in Antigua and Barbuda received millions of dollars from the Citizenship by Investment program. And where's that money? Where's the accounting for it? According, Madam President, to Regulation 13(2)(f), it is supposed to be listed within the 6-month report, and it is not there, even though the report acknowledges that money, applicants, invested money into such businesses, real estate projects, charities, government-sponsored projects, etc., during that period. And I can go on and on and on. But in the interest of time, Madam President, I believe the point was made. Let's jump forward to something closer to present day. Oh, I have an hour? Okay, yes, okay, let me take my, I'm advised I could take my time, Madam President.
You do not have an hour.
Oh, okay.
You do not have an hour. Oh, is he the one in
I'm
response?
first
I'm sorry.
responding.
Go ahead. Yes, my apologies.
Right. Yes, Madam President. So I spoke about 2016, January to June. Let's look at 2016, June to December. We have NDF received 91 applications, and as according to law, Madam President, those 91 applications each are listed in the 6-month report with the total purchase price of each application, Madam President, and their nationality and all these other things. Why were those other measures not done, adhered to it in the 6-month report for the 27 real estate applications received in that time period, for the 25 business investment applications received in that period, coming to a total of 143 applications? Madam President, this is a significant gap in the transparency and accountability, and puts a gray area over the integrity of our Citizenship by Investment program, which we all in this honorable house want to see succeed. We want to see it do well. If that goes away, it's a headache for us, because how are we going to plug that? I read from the budget, I read from the Director of Audit report, that's a significant, that is by far the biggest non-tax revenue earner in this country. What are we going to do if we mash it up? And it appears to me, Madam President, with all the pressure we're receiving from the US, from the European Union, etc., with this loss of visa-free access, that we have mashed up our program. As I mentioned before, the removal of the accounts and audit requirement, as one party in government, as it relates to the non-publishing, the non-adherence, the violating of the Principal Act. And we're now coming here to this honorable house after the fact, after the crime has already been committed. I put crime in quotation marks, Madam President. Yes, in quotation marks. After the damage has already been done. Let me put it like that. After the damage has already been done, Madam President, we're coming to this honorable house to try to mop up after the fact. Why are we responding to a disaster rather than avert the disaster in the first place? When you get up in this honorable house, Madam President, through you, I'm just saying to the members on the other side, and you make claims that we have the most transparent, the most accountable, the program with the most integrity, you must be able to look at the law and ensure that your claims matches what the law is requiring. And unfortunately, this is something I take no pleasure in. But the people of Antigua and Barbuda must understand that we are not victims, as some people want to say. That, oh, there's unreasonable policies by first world countries trying to put pressure on our small states because they don't like us or they don't like certain things about us. We're not victims, Madam President. We are co-conspirators in the assassination of the reputation of the Antiguan and Barbudan passport. Co-conspirators. I continue with the bill, Madam President. The bill also references, Madam President, I just spoke about same clause 5, accounts and audit. I referenced 4, I'm still in 4. I did dealt with B. I'm going to deal with C, the integrity and effectiveness of due diligence and risk assessment procedures. Oh boy. Madam President, I don't even know where to begin, but I'll begin with recent times. That would be easier for me. The integrity and, let me read the whole thing. The audit shall, amongst other things, assess the integrity and effectiveness of due diligence and risk assessment procedures. This is also talking about the operational audit. It is to be done twice a year. That is a new measure, and again, I support that new measure. Now, what are my concerns with due diligence and risk assessment? Madam President, I have a question. Again, I remember clearly, Madam President, the former chief spokesperson for the government, Ambassador Max Hurst, would have mentioned several times that Antigua and Barbuda has one of the best due diligence processes in the whole world, not the Caribbean, the world, comparable to the United States of America. Just like the government business says, we're the most transparent with our CBI program. Ambassador Max Hurst's comments cannot match the facts again. Because, Madam President, in recent time in the news, we saw the publication that there was a judgment that was brought down against a certain Alex Saab Moran. And why is this relevant to the bill, Madam President? Because it deals with due diligence. What about due diligence? Alex Saab Moran, Madam President, just received judgment against him of $314 million for torture. That's not the only crime he has been investigated for, Madam President. He's been also been investigated for money laundering by the Ecuadorian government, by the Colombian government, by the United States, the government of the United States of America through FinCEN. And we see he's convicted of a crime. And he has to pay what? About him and the former president of Venezuela, Mr. Maduro, about $340 million. Due diligence. Why is it that in 2014, Mr. Alex Saab Moran, Madam President, received a passport? And that, remember, people, I forgot to say this. He is born and raised in Colombia. Now I have the links to Antigua and Barbuda. Why is it in 2014 Alex Saab Moran received a passport from the member for City West? Why? And not only just a passport, Madam President, he received a diplomatic passport in 2014. This is public record. And Madam President, you know them on the other side. If I was telling lies, spreading misinformation or disinformation, they'd be rising point to order. But they're quiet like a church mouse. I continue, Madam President.
I thought I saw like
Saab Moran received an official diplomatic passport, and he was appointed the special economic envoy of Antigua and Barbuda to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. He was appointed as special economic envoy by the member for City West, Madam President. And why is that so important? They say, oh, he only received a judgment recently in 2026. Madam President, a simple Google search, much less court case records across the whole world, Madam President, can tell you that Alex Saab Moran was under investigation for money laundering since 2012 and 2013. Even the Ecuadorian government, the United States government, FinCEN, I mentioned it before, since before 2014, the best due diligence, as mentioned by Ambassador Max Searles. The due diligence that this bill, Madam President, is looking to bolster. Too late is the cry. The bell has rung. The end is nigh, Madam President. And if you think it ends at Alex Saab Moran and nobody else, you can't point the finger at anybody else but this administration, specifically the member of City West. He is the one, Madam President, who gave him that diplomatic passport. And as a matter of fact, it goes even further, but this is beside the point, I still mention it. Alex Saab Moran, in the investigation for money laundering, it was related to a company that he was associated with, that deals with producing housing materials. And what was his main thing as Special Economic Envoy of Antigua and Barbuda to Venezuela is to assist in the housing program in Antigua and Barbuda. So that housing company that is being investigated internationally for money laundering is being tied up with Antigua and Barbuda. Oh, goodness, man. When I talk about we're not victims, Madam President, we are co-conspirators in the assassination of the reputation of the passport of Antigua and Barbuda. We must be able to take responsibility. That's part of leadership. Admit where you went wrong. Come clean to the people. Don't pretend like you're playing victim. And we hear phrases of, oh, there's a gun to our head and so on. Tell the people you helped to load the chamber. Anyway, I continue, Madam President. I don't end here because I'm still on the due diligence point. I'm still on the due diligence point as it relates to earpiece. Oh my. Earpiece that is now in bed with Liat here in Antigua and Barbuda. I can't even tell you what name the company is, how many times the name of the company changed, if it's Liat 20, Liat 2020, Liat this, Liat the other. Madam President, the people of Antigua and Barbuda need to be aware that the Onyemas have received, and this is public knowledge, and this is not nothing I am breaking, this is not breaking news, this is all news. The Prime Minister himself would have mentioned 10 CIP files went to that, the Onyemas. They invested through our CBI program. Now that alone is not anything nefarious. The question is due diligence. Why is it, again, the people that we have getting our passport through the CBI program, the people that we have invested into Liat, Madam President, their assets were seized, earpiece, owned by the Onyemas in the United States of America. They are under legal investigation in the United Kingdom. We can't attract better people. Why is it every time Antigua and Barbuda name always call up in some kind of corruption? If it's not guns to Colombia, space, research, social security, medical benefits, all kind of things. They want to mention other things.
Madam President, I rise on a
I'm speaking about due diligence, Madam President, pardon?
Madam President, I rise on a point of order.
What's your point of order?
The good senator would have mentioned about guns in Colombia. Yes, Madam President, I would like him to clarify or indicate his reference. I'm not sure if there was an article, I would have missed it, and no, Madam President, it wasn't finished. And how does it apply to the Antigua and Barbuda citizenship by investment bill that is before us, Madam President? I'm on the point of order. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by that question because I heard the, oh dear Father, have mercy, have mercy, have mercy. Yes, Senator, Bueno, what's the relationship to the CIP?
No problem, Madam President. Very easy. Due diligence. I was speaking about due diligence and
the gun running is related to CIP due diligence.
The type of people.
If you are referring to a situation that predated the CIP, long time since I was in my teens, it cannot be relevant to this legislation.
Madam President.
It cannot be relevant to this legislation.
Okay, no problem. I'm speaking about the reputational damage.
It cannot be relevant to this legislation. Senator, So you need to retract your statement in respect of gun running and the relationship it has with the CIP.
Madam President, I have much more substantial information to bring, so I have no problems with retracting that one. And I can move forward. I have no issue, but I know when people mention romantic rhythms before, there was no approval.
Didn't you mention
Anyways,
romantic rhythms in respect of Antigua and Barbuda Citizenship by Investment Amendment Bill 2026? And when I pass a ruling, I don't expect any snide comments after. I pass the ruling, you oblige me by following the ruling, and we move on. The snide comments are not necessary. It's disrespectful.
No problem, Madam President. I'm guided by a ruling. Now, Madam President, as I was speaking about the due diligence, as mentioned in accounts and audit for C, and I was speaking about especially the former Chief of Staff, I think he's still an Ambassador, Max Hurst's comments that we have the best due diligence in the whole world, comparable to the United States of America, yet still we're able to give diplomatic passports to Alex Saab Moran. We're still able to attract and give CIP passports to the Onyemers who have legal investigations going on with them. And I can go on and on and on. But, oh my goodness. There's so much we could go on and on and on about with the lack of due diligence, Madam President. But on top of that, Madam President, I want to recommend that in section, well, we're still in clause 5, we're now at 2G, response to the audit report, Madam President. But actually, before I get to that, I just want to read something here, because there was questions about how integrity, just now raised, how integrity and the reputation of Antigua and Barbuda relates to the bill before this Honourable House. I go back again to the Hansard of March 30th, 2016, the sitting of the lower house. And I want to read the member for St. John City West words again. And it reads as follows. The member for St. John City West. When it comes to the CIP program, we have to maintain the integrity of that program. If we fail to do so, it has revenue implications for the country. It has implications for the reputation of the country. And it even has other consequences. The member for St. John City West even went further to hammer home. And it's so ironic, Madam President, because this is the same debate in which he removed the accounts and audit requirement from the law. And I'm still waiting to be corrected if the parliamentary drafts people, because I've heard many times by members on the government side.
They don't have standing in the House right now, so you can't keep putting it to them. They don't have standing.
And I'm just asking for assistance with my contribution to the debate, Madam President, because I don't want to be given any false information.
They don't have standing now.
Okay, no problem.
When the committee stage come, you can ask a question and see if they'll oblige. But they don't have standing, so keep asking them, keeping just the persistence in asking the question to the legal drafts people are not going to be of importance at this stage.
Okay, no problem at all. Yeah. I'm guided by you as usual, Madam President. I move right along because I was making a point about the reputational integrity of our CBI program and how it affects the reputation of the country. And there were questions as to how the reputation of the country affects the bill before the House. I use the words from the member of St. John City West, the same Hansard. He goes on, if our international partners are of the view that this program is being abused, you can be assured that your visa-free access will be revoked. Oh, goodness, man. Your visa-free access to Canada, to Shenzhen. Mr. Speaker, we had to do the correct thing and to lay everything here on the table. Up to today, my government is the only government, perhaps in the world, I'm reading, that has a CIP program that continues to lay all of the information on the table. Oh, what a tangle web we weave. Madam President, the words don't match the actions. I started out with the law.
Senator, you are suggesting that those words were meant to deceive? I don't think that's what you want to say.
Madam President,
because that is the impression I'm getting. You say, you make the statement and then he said, oh, what a tangle. You're suggesting that, and I don't think that you being the person who talked about unparliamentary language and imputing improper motives should not be making that statement at all.
Okay, Madam President, no problem. I can move on without that. I don't
You
need
will
that.
withdraw the statement?
Sure, I can move on because the words clearly for the people of Antigua and Barbuda don't match the actions. I started out with the law.
There's a big difference with what you say there now as opposed to what you said before.
No problem at all, Madam President. I move on. I have much more substantive things to talk about. The words of the member for St. John's City West do not match the actions. The boasting and claims of most transparency, most accountable, the best integrity don't match the grade you're getting from your adherence to the law. You can't argue with the law. So, Madam President, I'd love when the leader of government business gets up to try to rebut and put the spin and try to defend their administration. They tell me how they are adhering to the laws that I have referred to them and telling them that they have been continuing to break for the last 10 years. Madam President, I continue. Madam President, I continue. I'm at 2G, response to the audit report. The unit shall take appropriate corrective action to address any material weaknesses or non-compliance identified in its audit report. No, I identified here for you, Madam President. Well, not even I, the law. Because I can't make up things the law says. That's what matters. The law identifies some, what does the bill say? Material weaknesses or non-compliance. Now, unfortunately, they cannot be identified in an audit report because as we would have established from the onset, there has been no audit report for over 10 years. And people who have some kind of understanding, who have some kind of interest in the business know that the FSRC here in Antigua and Barbuda will be behind you like you owe them rent, right? If you don't submit your statements in time, if you're behind on your statements as a local businessman here in Antigua and Barbuda, it's hell for you, much less for a program that brings in over $100 million in revenue every year to a country, a program that is linked with people obtaining citizenship and our passports here in Antigua and Barbuda. But let me pause, Madam President, as it relates to, 2G? Well, actually, no, let me conclude with this for 2G. I'm going to propose, Madam President, that there are some good things here, as I said before, but too little too late will be the cry. Well, as it relates to this...
I didn't hear you, but that's what I heard.
There's some good things in this.
Yes,
there's some good things in this. Okay. So the units shall, Madam President, I'm looking at 6. This is the same 2E, 6. The unit shall submit a report, okay, let's jump down to B. Within 30 days of the submission of the audit report, publish the report on its website in a format that is accessible and readable by the public. Now, Madam President, what I want to suggest to our drafts people is that these words, publish the report with its written response, because notice there's a section called response to the audit report. So we also want to have the benefit as the legislators here in Antigua and Barbuda to see the response of the unit to the concerns raised by the auditor. I think that is only reasonable. Okay, so I'm suggesting that we insert with its written response as provided for in 2G later on. And also at the end of that provision, on its website, published on its website in a form that is accessible and readable to the public, and shall submit a copy of both to the minister. I'm suggesting that we submit a copy of both the auditor's report and the unit's response to the auditor's report to the minister responsible for the unit. And after that provision, so that's 2B, I'm proposing to the drafts people, we make those amendments, we add 2C. Well, not 2C, 6C. And it should read as follows. The minister shall, as soon as possible after receipt of the report and response, in accordance with subsection 6B, lay a copy of the report and response before the House of Representatives. Because as it stands now, Madam President, there is a requirement for the 6 months report to come before the House of Representatives, for the minister to table them. There's a requirement for the, well, there's not. There used to be a requirement for the audit accounts to come before the House to be tabled by the minister, Madam President. So I'm just suggesting, in keeping with that trend of transparency and accountability, that we also require for the unit's audit report and the unit's response, the audit report and the unit's response to the audit report be submitted to the minister and tabled before this honorable House. I don't think we can go too far as it relates to transparency and accountability, especially given the current circumstance with our citizenship by investment program. Now, Madam President, I would have mentioned several times issues as it relates to non-compliance, irregularities, and we're moving on to 2H as it relates to special audit of the unit by the authority. We have to understand that we qualify here in Antigua and Barbuda for a special unit by the authority because it says, pursuant to Section 2G, the authority, that's ISIRA, may initiate a special audit of the unit where A, significant irregularities or adverse audit findings reoccur in 2 or more audit cycles, or B, credible information or complaints suggest systemic governance failures or corruption. Now, I think in both A and B, the current citizenship by investment unit here in Antigua and Barbuda falls into those categories, thereby qualifying it for a special unit by ISIRA. Why do I say that? Because there are significant irregularities within our current operations, because there's law breaking. The 6-month report do not adhere to Regulation 13(2)(f). There are significant irregularities again because we don't have audit statements for the last 10 years. 10 years! Boy, some people don't listen, Madam President. Anyways, as I continue, Madam President, I want us to just take into consideration that these situations that we have right now, this current situation, circumstance, that has prompted this bill and this kind of action around our CBI program to be initiated, is not something that happened in a vacuum. It's not something that has happened out of the blue. We have been warned and warned and warned again, Madam President, by Canada, by the US, and by the European Union. Madam President, since last year, the European Union was making recommendations to us to increase the residency requirement. Since the year before last year, the European Union was making the same recommendations to us. Since the year before the year of last year, this EU was making those recommendations to us for us to increase those residency requirements. Madam President, since the 2020 United States Human Rights Report, Antigua and Barbuda was cited for concerns about lack of transparency. I highlighted to you, Madam President, the specific area in the law as it relates to lack of transparency, and the specific area in which parts of the law were removed and repealed, Madam President. I'm referring to the repeal of the audit requirement. I'm referring to the non-compliance with Regulation 13(2)(f). And the people of Antigua and Barbuda are going to have it imprinted in their minds by the time we sit down. Regulation 13(2)(f). Why is it that none of them, Madam President, can show us where those things are in the report? Because it's not there. Because, Madam President, they don't adhere to the law as a government. And it's unfortunate. And we are going to pay the price. We are going to pay the price. But, Madam President, as I continue, I just want to continue with the further removal of the legal guardrails within this Citizenship by Investment Act, Antigua and Barbuda Citizenship by Investment Act of 2013 as a principal act. I said there have been subsequent amendments, and I'm just referring to the legal guardrails. I would have mentioned the removal of the audit requirement. I will wait for the whole debate to see if anybody tells me where in the existing law that exists. I'm going to mention the fact, continue to mention the fact that the 6-month report was diluted. I'm not talking about F, the legal requirements there. I'm talking about, let me tell you exactly what I'm speaking about. So the 6-month reports used to have the requirements. This is Regulation 13(2). Let me tell you, yes, D, Regulation 13(2)(d). Currently, Madam President, the law says the nationality, the 6-month report, shall have the nationality of the applicants and of any dependents included in the application. Now, before in the Principal Act, right here, Madam President, 2013, you go over to the same Regulation 13(2)(d), and it says it should have the names. The 6-month report is supposed to publish for all applicants the names, addresses, and the nationalities of the applicants and of any dependents included in the application. Why is it in 2016 we didn't just see it fit to remove the audit requirement, which is a big deal? is a massive deal to remove an audit requirement. So there's no financial transparency and accountability. Gone. Gone. That's totally gone. On top of that, we remove the type of transparency as it relates to the applicants who apply to the fund, to the program, to the CBI program. And I'm asking a question, Madam President. Is that why people like Alexa Moran can get an official diplomatic passport? Is that people why
I stand point on order, Madam President. Enough is enough, Madam.
What is the point of order?
Madam President, I want to just bring to the attention the point of order stands on the premise that the young senator is misleading the House. He continues to talk about Alex Saab. I want him to understand that official records matter in this House. So we're calling for the evidence. You talk about a Google search. Google search is not enough evidence where this is concerned. And I want you to understand, in 2019, when allegations surfaced that Alex Saab's activities were linked to our government and banks, Antigua was implicated, we came out, the government responded that the US indictment did not name our country, Antigua and Barbuda.
And so your point of order is?
The point of order is the young man is misleading the House, Madam President.
The young man whom?
The senator, sorry.
Is misleading the House, how?
With false information.
Which is? Which is that the
information is the way he's making it sound. He's saying, Madam President, that we were implicated to the point that it is affecting us.
Senator Hughes, allow me. No, you can't help him. No, he doesn't need any help. Senator Brown.
Yes.
What I'm gathering from Senator Wenner's presentation is that the after effects of the situation that the named individual seemed to have found himself in after he had a passport is and impacts, I'm going back to the provision, the reputation, and the questions the effectiveness of our due diligence process. I didn't get anything other than that. What I'm concerned about is the repetition of the same point over and over again, Senator Wenner.
Repetition important.
There's emphasis and there's repetition. There's emphasis and there's repetition. And I thought that is what Senator Brown was coming, because I just pulled out my standing order to look for the provision about the repetition. And I couldn't find it because I got distracted, because I had to listen to what the Senator Brown was saying. So, Senator, I hear you. I'd like you to move on.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I will
and just to say that you had 10 minutes at the time. Yes, you had 10 minutes to go.
10 minutes to go, you said?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fantastic.
I just had to add back that 2 minutes.
Wonderful, Madam President. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And,
now,
and just to say, don't ask me for additional time.
No, I would not need additional time at all, Madam President. I have other colleagues who can just as capably make contributions to this amendment. Okay. Madam President, what we have here, okay, I want to go back again, in conclusion of this point, to the Hansard of the debate in the lower house on the 30th of March, 2016, where the legal guardrails were stripped away from the Principal Act, Madam President. I mentioned them before, so to avoid repetition, I won't mention them again. Now I want to conclude the point on due diligence. The member for St. John's City West, again, he says, Mr. Speaker.
He says when and where?
I just said that. A Hansard from the sitting of the Lower House, March 30th, 2016. Yes. So he says, member for City West, Mr. Speaker, not to anticipate, but you will recognize that there are other pieces of legislation, including the APIS legislation, in which we are strengthening the whole infrastructure to guard against terrorist financing, money laundering, and to make sure that Antigua and Barbuda can have a legitimate program, referring to the CBI program, in which we do not attract any crooks and criminals. We do not attract too many, but we do not attract any. That means not even one. Failed as it relates to that, Madam President. Madam President, people can disagree, but the letter of the law is clear, the record is clear. And as it relates to the management, the fiscal management, as it relates to the adherence of the law, as it relates to the operations of the CIU, I think thus far I have laid out for the people of Antigua and Barbuda in contribution to debate on this amendment to the bill that yes, these amendments coming before this House are good. They should have came since 2016, the year when the legal guardrails were stripped away from the Principal Act. They should have came since then. They're coming now after the threat. The warning, not the threat, the warning that what is imminent is going to happen. Now we're moving. Now we're moving when we have been co-conspirators in the assassination of the reputation of the passport of Antigua and Barbuda. Madam President, if it pleases you.
Is that Senator Weno? Turn off your light. I'm seeing Senator Cowan and Senator St. Louis. I don't know who went on first. Who's yielding to whom?
Okay.
Okay, Senator Cowan.
Madam President, I rise to make my contribution on the Antigua and Barbuda Citizenship by Investment Amendment Bill 2026. If my voice trembles a little bit, I'm a little cold. I thought that the 2 potato dumpling and the saltfish from the kitchen at lunch would have made me warm, but I'm a little bit chilly. I note from the clerk's record that this bill was passed in the Honorable House of Representatives without amendment following its 3rd reading, and I thought perhaps it suggests a broad level of agreement with the policy direction of the legislation, but I believe it's because there was such a hot-button topic that by the time they were done debating, they just wanted to go home. So I know that my good colleagues, here are going to make sure that they touch on this bill. Nevertheless, one of the important responsibilities of this Honorable Senate is not simply to endorse legislation because it has been passed elsewhere, but to subject it to thoughtful reflection. And it is in that spirit that I offer my contribution today. At first glance, the legislation before us appears to be a technical amendment to the CIP Act. It introduces refinements to procedures, strengthens governance arrangements, and enhances due diligence, improves information sharing, and aligns Antigua and Barbuda's program more closely with emerging regional standards. And these are all important legislative reforms. I respectfully submit that this bill is about much more than administrative amendments. It is about how Antigua and Barbuda defines itself in an increasingly scrutinized world. It is about the value we place on our citizenship. It is about protecting one of the most recognizable symbols of our sovereignty, our passport. It is about preserving international confidence in our institutions, and perhaps most importantly, it is about ensuring that as a small island developing state, we continue to exercise our sovereign right to determine our own future, while recognizing that we do so within an international community that is increasingly interconnected, increasingly regulated, and increasingly interdependent. Madam President, I approach this presentation neither as an unquestioning endorsement of every aspect of our CIP program, nor as a critic seeking to diminish its contribution to our national development. Rather, I approach it as an independent senator committed to ensuring that public policy advances the national interest, strengthens public confidence, and protects the long-term reputation of Antigua and Barbuda. That, in my respectful view, is precisely what this debate requires, because citizenship is unlike any other commodity a nation possesses. Governments may license businesses, governments may lease land, governments may enter into commercial agreements, but citizenship is fundamentally different. It represents membership in a national community. It represents rights and responsibilities. It reflects identity, belonging, and allegiance. And it determines who speaks for the nation abroad and who carries its name across international borders. And that is why debates surrounding CIP have always attracted strong opinions, not only within our country, but throughout the international community. For some, investment migration programs is innovation. For others, it has become an economic necessity. For still others, it raises legitimate questions about transparency, security, and international cooperation. As legislators, it is our responsibility not to dismiss these perspectives, nor to become defensive in the face of criticism. And of course, Senator Wenner spoke extensively about accountability, and rightfully so. Our responsibility is to examine these perspectives honestly, respond where reform is required, and ensure that our legislative framework continues to reflect the highest standards of governance. That's what mature democracies do. Strong institutions don't fear scrutiny. They welcome opportunities to improve. Madam President, public confidence is built not by insisting that our institutions are beyond criticism, but by demonstrating that they possess the maturity to evolve. In fact, some of the strongest institutions around the world are those who regularly review themselves, identify areas for improvement, and adapt to changing realities. The legislation before us reflects precisely that philosophy, in my view. It recognizes that the international environment in which investment migration programs operate today is not the same as it was 10 years ago. Expectations have changed, technology has changed, international cooperation has certainly changed, and the methods used by those who seek to exploit legitimate systems have also changed. It therefore follows that responsible governments must also change. Madam President, the world within which Antigua and Barbuda now operates is fundamentally different from the one that existed when many CBI programs were first established. International mobility has become increasingly interconnected with global security. Financial regulation has become more sophisticated. Information sharing among governments has expanded significantly. Technological advances have transformed the way identities are verified, financial transactions are monitored, and cross-border risks are assessed. At the same time, international expectations surrounding transparency and accountability, again, have become considerably higher. These developments are neither unique to Antigua and Barbuda nor directed solely at CIPs. Rather, they reflect broader global trends affecting taxation, banking, financial services, immigration, cybersecurity, and international commerce. Whether we agree with every international standard that emerges, in many respects, is a separate conversation. The practical reality is that those standards increasingly influence how nations interact with one another. For a country our size, that reality simply cannot be ignored. Madam President, Antigua and Barbuda occupies a unique place within the international community. Like many of our Caribbean neighbors, we are classified as SIDS, Small Island Developing States. And that designation is not merely descriptive. It reflects a particular set of economic, environmental, and geopolitical realities, and we possess limited land resources. We maintain relatively small domestic markets. Our economies remain vulnerable to external shocks over which we have little control. A global recession, a pandemic, a hurricane, changes in airline routes, fluctuations in tourism, shifts in international banking relationships. These all decisions are taken in financial capitals thousands of miles away. Each of these can significantly influence our national economy despite happening way beyond our shores. Unlike larger economies, we cannot rely upon vast domestic markets to absorb these shocks. We're not even able to depend upon extensive natural resources to generate sustainable national wealth. Beg your pardon. So small island developing states have historically been compelled to innovate, diversify, adapt, to identify opportunities where others see limitations. Our tourism sector is an innovation. Our financial services sector reflects innovation. Our maritime registry reflects innovation. Our digital transformation efforts reflect innovation. And yes, CIP also reflects innovation. It emerged from necessity and economic strategy. And like many policy innovations developed by small states, it sought to create sustainable opportunities within the constraints imposed by our geographical location and our limited natural resources. So because when evaluating any public policy, we must always ask not only whether it is desirable in theory, but whether it responds effectively to the practical realities facing the nation implementing it. Madam President, Antigua and Barbuda may not possess the vast oil reserves that have historically attracted the most dramatic forms of geopolitical attention. Perhaps in that regard, we should count ourselves fortunate. History teaches, and recent events further afield and in our very own region teaches us that immense natural wealth has not always translated into peace and stability. According to Bob Marley, when you think it's peace and safety, a sudden destruction. So let us not deceive ourselves into believing that small island developing states somehow exist beyond the reach of international influence. Today's geopolitical influence is frequently exercised through international financial systems, through corresponding banking relationships, visa policies, regulatory expectations, international compliance, through access to markets, through economic partnerships. And in this 21st century, nations don't always need to exercise direct political authority over another country in order to influence policy. And we've seen that firsthand again. Sometimes the most powerful influence is economic. Sometimes it's regulatory. Sometimes it's reputational. And that reality does not diminish our sovereignty. It simply reminds us that sovereignty today operates within an increasingly interconnected international system. Indeed, Madam President, the true measure of sovereignty is not merely the legal right to make decisions. It is also the practical ability to make these decisions while preserving the confidence, trust, and relationships necessary to advance the national interest. So for SIDS, that distinction matters. And very often, our greatest national asset are not those that can be extracted from the ground, like oil. They are those that can be earned through consistent governance, trust, credibility, stability, integrity, reputation. Those are the assets that cannot be legislated overnight. They are built slowly and protected carefully. And if neglected, can be lost far more quicker than they were ever gained. Madam President, that is why I believe this bill deserves our thoughtful consideration, because at its heart, it asks a question that extends well beyond CIP. It asks whether Antigua and Barbuda is prepared to continue strengthening the institutions upon which our national reputation depends. And for SIDS, that may be one of the most important questions we can ever answer in this honorable House. Madam President, there is a question that, in my respectful view, every honest debate on CIP must be prepared to answer. Senator Werner, has the program been perfect? The answer is no. And I do not believe that acknowledging this weakens our position. On the contrary, I believe it strengthens it. No institution designed, administered, and regulated by human beings have ever been perfect. No government program has ever been beyond improvement. No legislative framework has ever reached a point where refinement became unnecessary. To suggest otherwise would be neither realistic nor credible. One of the defining characteristics of mature institutions is not the absence of criticism. It is their willingness to learn from it. And over the years, legitimate questions have been raised concerning investment migration programs, not only here in Antigua and Barbuda, but across the Caribbean and around the world. Questions surrounding transparency, consistency, due diligence, governance, information sharing between jurisdictions, public confidence. Whether those concerns have always been fairly expressed is a separate matter. Whether every criticism has been justified is also open to debate. But the existence of criticism alone does not invalidate a program. Neither should it paralyze reform. Responsible governments do not ignore legitimate concerns simply because they arise externally, nor should they dismiss every criticism as an attack upon national sovereignty. Instead, responsible governments ask a different question. What improvements can we make that strengthen both the integrity of the program and the confidence of those whom we serve? That, Madam President, is the question this legislation seeks to answer. Madam President, there is another reality that we cannot ignore. In today's interconnected world, and there's that word again, I've said that about 3 times, because we live in a global village, perception often travels faster than fact. A headline written in one jurisdiction can influence investment decisions in another. A social media post can shape international opinion before official facts are even considered. A single isolated incident can unfairly color perceptions of an entire program. That is neither fair nor ideal, but it is the reality of the age in which we live. As legislators, we therefore have a responsibility not only to govern well, but to ensure that our governance is worthy of public confidence. Because confidence is not created by declarations. It is earned through transparency, through accountability, through consistency, through independent oversight and continuous improvement. And that is why I believe it is important that we distinguish between defending a program and strengthening a program. If our first instinct is always to defend, we may overlook opportunities to improve. If, however, our first instinct is to improve, the program ultimately becomes easier to defend. So this is the conversation we must not avoid. Madam President, among the many criticisms that have circulated internationally regarding CIPs is the perception that they may provide indirect access to larger jurisdictions, including the US, the UK, and the EU. Whether one agrees with that characterization or not is not the point. That's not the point I seek to make today. The point is that the perception exists. And perception, particularly in international affairs, carries consequences. Visa arrangements are influenced by confidence. International partnerships are influenced by confidence. Corresponding banking relationships are influenced by confidence. Investment decisions are influenced by confidence. Trust between nations are influenced by confidence. Therefore, pretending that these discussions do not exist serves neither our national interest nor our international reputation. So equally, however, we should resist the temptation to accept every criticism as an objective reflection of reality. The responsible path lies in balance. If concerns are raised regarding due diligence, we strengthen due diligence. If concerns arise regarding transparency, we strengthen transparency. If governance structures require improvement, we improve governance. If international cooperation requires enhancement, we enhance cooperation. That is precisely what responsible legislatures do. We respond with policy. Madam President, sometimes there's a misconception that legislative reform somehow represents an admission that previous systems were inadequate. However, I believe the strongest institutions in the world are those that are constantly evolving. Banks update compliance systems, airlines continually improve safety procedures, hospitals revise medical protocols, universities update academic standards, courts refine judicial practice, parliaments amend legislation. None of these reforms imply failure. They reflect institutional maturity. Madam President, from time to time, discussions surrounding the international standards can create the impression that national sovereignty and international cooperation exist in opposition to one another. I respectfully submit that they do not. A sovereign nation remains free to determine its own laws. A sovereign parliament remains free to determine its own legislation. A sovereign people remain free to determine their own national priorities. But sovereignty has always existed alongside responsibility. Responsibility to uphold international obligations, to maintain secure borders, to combat financial crime, to protect the integrity of our institutions, to preserve the confidence in our passport. Madam President, as we consider the specifics contained within this bill, I believe we should view them as a part of a broader commitment, a commitment to stronger institutions, to stronger governance, greater transparency, to enhanced public confidence, and ultimately to protecting one of the most valuable assets Antigua and Barbuda possesses. Not merely our CIP, not merely our passport, our reputation. Because one's reputation is diminished, restoring it is infinitely more difficult than preserving it in the first place. And it is for that reason, Madam President, that I now turn to the specific reforms contained within the bill and the contribution I believe they make to strengthening the legislative framework governing one of Antigua and Barbuda's most significant programs.
That you have 10 minutes left on your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Throughout my contributions thus far, I have spoken about reputation, sovereignty, institutional maturity, and public confidence, and those principles provide the framework within which we should evaluate this bill. And we must now ask the more practical question. Do the amendments before us strengthen the legislative framework governed by the CIP? Having examined the bill, I believe the answer is yes. Not because the legislation claims perfection, but because it seeks to make the program stronger. In that respect, Madam President, this bill reflects a philosophy of continuous improvement rather than complacency. Madam President, one of the most significant features of this legislation is its continued emphasis on regional cooperation, particularly through the framework established by the Eastern Caribbean Citizenship by Investment Regulatory Authority, and I think Senator Wanna called it EXIRA. I'm going to piggyback off of that. The Clause 3 is significant because reputation is no longer judged solely on the national level. Increasingly, our programs are assessed collectively. Regional oversight, therefore, strengthens and not diminishes our credibility. When One Caribbean CIP faces criticism, the effects are seldom confined to a single jurisdiction. So the reputation of the region is viewed collectively. Consequently, one weak program has the potential to diminish the confidence in every program. And this is precisely why regional cooperation should never be interpreted as a surrender of national sovereignty. Rather, it represents sovereign nations choosing to work together in pursuit of shared standards that protect their collective interests. And we see this in principle operate successfully in many other areas, within the OAS, within CARICOM, within our shared judicial institutions, within disaster preparedness, within public health. Small states have consistently discovered that cooperation often enhances rather than diminishes national resilience. So the same philosophy applies here. Madam President, no country can effectively safeguard the integrity of investment migration if it acts entirely in isolation while operating within a global system. Madam President, another aspect of the bill relates to governance itself. Governance simply answers a fundamental question. How do citizens know that public systems are operating fairly, consistently, and responsible? The answer lies in accountability, not occasional accountability, not selective accountability, but institutional accountability. And this legislation introduces measures that strengthen oversight within the administration of the program. That is significant. Public confidence is sustained not merely by trusting individuals, it is sustained by trusting systems. Because what? Individuals change, governments change, administrations change, political priorities change. Institutions, however, should be continuous. Strong legislation, therefore, seeks to build systems capable of maintaining integrity regardless of who occupies public office. And that is one of the distinguishing characteristics of mature democracies. The rule of law becomes stronger than individual personalities, and institutions become stronger than political cycles. And I believe these reforms move us further in that direction. Madam President, transparency should never be viewed as an inconvenience, nor should accountability be regarded as an administrative burden. Clause number 5, requiring annual financial and operational audits of the program, is one of the strongest accountability measures contained within this bill. Independent review, to me, is not evidence of mistrust. It is evidence of institutional confidence. When programs are examined regularly, when operational procedures are reviewed objectively, public trust increases. Madam President, the bill also contemplates greater use of information sharing and regional databases. Such measures reflect the realities of 21st century governance. The movement of people across international borders has become increasingly sophisticated. Identity verification, criminal networks have become increasingly transactional. Identity verification has become increasingly technological, and consequently, governments must become increasingly collaborative. No single authority can independently identify every emerging risk. So as governments collect more information, however, they simultaneously must assume greater responsibility for protecting it. Cybersecurity is therefore no longer merely an information technology issue. It has become a national security issue. Personal information, financial information, biometric information, these represent some of the most sensitive categories of data any government may possess. Citizens and applicants alike deserve confidence that such information will be protected with the highest possible standards of confidentiality and security. Madam President, perhaps no phrase has become more closely associated with investment migration than due diligence. And for good reason. Due diligence represents the foundation upon which the credibility of every CIP ultimately rests. Without rigorous due diligence, public confidence weakens. International confidence weakens. The value of the passport weakens. the reputation of the nation weakens. But when due diligence is comprehensive, objective, and continuously strengthened, as is proposed in this bill, confidence grows. Madam President, one observation deserves emphasis. As we strengthen governance, we must also remain attentive to efficiency. Integrity and efficiency should never be viewed as competing objectives. They are complementary objectives. A program that is efficient but lacks integrity will eventually lose credibility. Conversely, a program that possesses integrity but becomes unnecessarily burdensome may gradually lose competitiveness. The challenge before policymakers is therefore to maintain balance. Madam President, as legislators, we often debate laws that will outlive our individual terms in office. And this bill is one such example. Governments will change, oppositions will change, senators will change, yet the institutions we strengthen today may continue serving Antigua and Barbuda for decades. And that perspective reminds us that we are not owners of these institutions. We are stewards, and our responsibility is not merely to preserve what we inherited, it is to leave it stronger than we found it. Madam President, having considered the principles underlying the bill and the practical reforms it introduces, I now wish to conclude my contribution by reflecting on the broader responsibility entrusted to Parliament, not simply to legislate for the present, but to safeguard the future reputation, credibility, and sovereignty of Antigua and Barbuda. For ultimately, this is the enduring purpose of good legislation. It is not merely to solve today's problems. It is to strengthen tomorrow's possibilities. As legislators, we often speak
Senator, I'm going to have to stop you if you're not wrapping up now.
I will wrap up now, Madam President. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam President, having expressed my support for the broad objectives of this legislation, I believe it's entirely appropriate for me as an independent senator to also ask several questions that will continue guiding implementation, not because I oppose it, but because this is good legislation to be passed. Have we strengthened accountability? Have we enhanced transparency? Have we reinforced due diligence? I believe this legislation moves us significantly in that direction. And just to wrap up, Madam President, I do not measure legislation by the political benches from which it originates. I measure it by whether it strengthens our institutions, protects national interest, and leaves Antigua and Barbuda prepared for the future than it was before. Because our reputation is the new natural resource. If it pleases you, Madam President, I now take my seat.
Senator St. Luce.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to add my support to the following bill, the Antigua and Barbuda Citizenship by Investment Amendment Bill 2026. One of the things I really need to say, Madam President, is when I drive, I don't, and I'm going down the road, I don't look in my rearview mirror. I look forward through my windshield to see where I'm going. And this particular... But I will say one thing, because one of my colleagues on the other side did mention, and it was actually Senator Hughes, about the importance of understanding the history of bills and understanding where you're coming from to go where you're going. But at the same time, when we drive, we don't look in our rearview mirror for the whole journey. But I will say one other thing. I'm very happy that Senator Wenner quoted our Honorable Prime Minister quite extensively, speaking about the things he said in 2016, things that he said about the program, because it actually ties into what I have to say. Now, one of the things that we cannot miss while looking at this bill, debating this bill, is that it is not simply a bill that just came out of Antigua and Antigua's issues and challenges with its CIP. Actually, no. And I want us to remember there are 5 OECS countries that all have CIP programs. Ours is not the first, and ours is not the biggest, I just want to let you all know that. So we have St. Kitts and Nevis, Dominica, Grenada, Antigua, Barbuda, St. Lucia, with St. Kitts being the first one. And I want to address something, because during that time where repetition seemed to be the topic of the day, the order of the day, you know, as individuals who sit in this honorable house, whether you're in the lower or the upper, where we are, the upper, first and foremost, we must love this country. We must not seek to ever, and before anybody over here jumps up, Madam President, because I'm not quoting anybody, I'm making a very general statement. We cannot seek to tear down our nation publicly for political points. And I say that to say this: our CIP program is not the worst. It may not be the best, but most importantly, it's not the only one in the world, and it's certainly not the worst. And while we're doing our searches and our Googling and our research and whatnot, we should always seek to see what is happening in other places. We can't just look at Antigua and say, oh, Antigua did this wrong, Antigua. CIP is not an Antigua thing. Quite a few countries have CIP. And guess what? Like everything else in the world, and I think it was Senator Kerwin that said, nobody's perfect, nothing is perfect, no program is perfect. In the other islands, and I will encourage persons who are curious to really understand Antigua's stance in all of this, I encourage everybody to do your research and see what kind of challenges other OECS CIP countries have experienced. And you'll be quite shocked, because trust me, you won't have to live on one person's name that begins with an A and ends with an X. There's actually quite a few names that have nothing at all to do with Antigua, and the crimes they committed and the things that they've done make our situation look like a Boy Scout, to be honest with you. But that's not where I wanted to go. Where I wanted to go is, I wanted to talk about why, first things first, this bill, it's not necessarily just for Antigua. Right here in the document we were given, and you go to page 24 at the top, where they explain what this bill seeks to do. It seeks to amend the Antigua and Barbuda Citizenship by Investment Act 2013 to align with the Eastern Caribbean Citizenship by Investment Regulatory Authority Agreement Act 2025, right? By recognizing the competence of the Eastern Caribbean Citizenship by Investment Regulatory Authority as the regional regulatory authority in the administration framework of the Citizen by Investment Program. We're looking to harmonize the CIP programs in all the OECS countries. And I want you to understand something too. This is so important, because I don't like us saying we're being reactive. This is a reactive decision. This bill appeared magically because we panicked because the EU said something. And because, yes, there are recent headlines where the EU has said something. But I want you to know conversations about creating the, and let me use a shortened form, the ECCIRA, the Regulatory Authority. Conversations to start the Regulatory Authority started within the OECS CIP countries since somewhere between 2023 and 2024, right? So everybody recognized that there was an issue. Each one of us were operating in a silo, and by doing so, we were devaluing our programs. Another thing we need to point out is, Senator Wenner pointed out, 2016, the Prime Minister was quite vocal about the direction our CIP program should go in, and he has said as recently as in this lower house, last week, that he has been very vocal at multiple meetings for the OECS, at CIP meetings, in this house as well, that the countries need to come together, the CIP countries need to come together and set standards that all of them would abide by. He even spoke about one country in particular, wanting to lower its price to $100,000. And you know, it's interesting because the country that he mentioned wanted to lower its price, was probably one of the last ones to become a CIP country. Yes, St. Lucia. That is correct. And believe it or not, the Honorable Representative for Barbuda in the lower house mentioned, and he has repeatedly, about a race to the bottom, and he wasn't speaking about Antigua alone. He was saying all the OECS CIP countries. So again, this is not a unique to Antigua issue. And it is not a Gaston Brown, Honorable Gaston Brown issue either. Right, so, and I want to also point out something else, because we keep talking about the EU, the UK, the USA, and I want us to understand this. It is during the year of 2025, they started to put, these countries came together, as in the OECS countries, started to put things together to create this regulatory authority. And they did it with extensive consultations with those same countries, Canada, the UK, the USA. So we didn't do it on our own in a little corner hiding away whispering. We included those major countries that did say we have some challenges with your programs. Again, their challenges with the program wasn't because Antigua did something wrong. They looked at the whole picture and said, things need to be harmonized here. You all need to set standards that we can understand, and all of you need to be more transparent. So after all those consultations, and they put together their agreements, there was a draft bill, and believe it or not, right after that draft bill was made public, allowing the public to weigh in. A lot of people don't know that because we don't pay attention until something goes wrong. So it was available for the public to comment on, and then they signed, these countries, these OECS CIP countries, started to sign off on this agreement, on this bill. Last year, all this happened in less than 1 year. That's to tell you how seriously they took it. And again, Antigua and Barbuda was the most vocal throughout the whole process, and we should be proud of ourselves for that, not tearing ourselves down. Antigua and Barbuda was one of the first countries to sign for the creation of this regulatory authority. So now what is happening today with this bill now, well, I'm grabbing the wrong paper, but this bill now is basically them implementing the advice, the framework, the steps outlined by this regulatory authority created by these countries. That is all we're doing today. These are not special rules just for Antigua. These are special rules that are going to be presented in parliaments of all of the CIP OECS countries. We are not doing anything special. So when we go back and forth and back, we need to understand something. What's in here is a direct result of intensive consultations with those same countries that we say do have an issue with us because we did blah, 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 and all sorts of things wrong. And that's a fact. I'm not making that up. And, you know, I just want to point out certain things in here that I'm happy to see in here because, you know, you're right, Senator, well, Madam President, Senator Wenner is right. Auditing was a challenge. It was a challenge for all of them, and that's so unfortunate. But thankfully, now that they're harmonizing their rules and whatnots and their standards, auditing is now going to be a regular thing. Not only that, it's going to be completely transparent and robust, and all the countries will be able to see it, and any of these larger countries who want to see it can also see it, and it will be available to the public because it will be posted on a website. So full transparency. So look at us going forward and not driving while staring in our rearview mirror. Another thing in here that stood out that I applaud, and this is going to, again, apply to all the CIP OECS countries, they address residency. We hear a lot of comments coming out of the larger countries about the residency. Are you here for 30 days? Are you not here for 30 days? Are you here at all? It's addressed, and you know what's wonderful? All the countries have to agree on this. It's not everybody doing their own thing. Same thing with the price, the minimum price now. All the countries had to agree on it. It is now set in stone. And another thing that's great, there are penalties in here. We speak about if a person fails to meet the requirements of residency, they're kicked out of the program. And once you're pushed out, you can't go passport shopping. You can't go to another country and say, hey, I'm going to offer you a little extra money. No. No. If one country says no, or you failed in the process of applying for this thing in one country, all countries tell you no. No is no for everybody at that point. Another thing that stood out for me is, let's see. Well, the collection of data is quite robust. I like that, and I'm actually very curious to see how data will be collected, because I think it was Senator Kerwin spoke about technology and cyber crimes and all of that. So we're going to have to definitely see, because all of us should be invested in how this works out. How are they going to collect the data? How are they going to keep it secured and so forth? But it seems to me that is something that, you know, as time passes, those things will be ironed out further. Now, one last thing, because I want to be brief, because we've been in here a very long time, and there's still one more bill and quite a few resolutions to go through. One of the things I want to say about what we're seeing with this bill, because this bill is not the end of the story. This bill is showing progress. It's showing that we understand our issues. We're no longer operating in a silo. All these countries who are impacted are coming together and agreeing on standards, agreeing that there's an issue and they need to be corrected, agreeing that we have to stop this race to the bottom, as we call it, and do better. But this process is very important because, again, it's true, we have been hearing from the EU, the UK, and the US that they have an issue not with just our CIP, they have an issue with all CIP programs. And this issue also exists on the other side of the world, like places like Malta and I think Vanuatu and Cyprus. They have their challenges on their side of the planet as well. But by us having this bill here and implementing it quickly and starting the process that it triggers, it puts us in a better footing now to have a conversation with those larger countries to show we are doing the right thing, we're taking the right steps, we're showing the level of responsibility that we should, so that hopefully the threat of being punished for having a CIP program may actually go away. This is the only way to make that happen. But again, this is not us being responsive, this is us simply being responsible and finally doing something that we hardly do in the Caribbean enough. We're working together. That is the end of my contribution, if it so pleases you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Parker.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, it is so important that we be consistent in who we are and in our speech and our actions. And as I sat here listening to the debate on this, the last time this came to the House when I was here in the Senate, I was over there on the government's benches, and history will recall that I voted against the CIP legislation at the time. And this is why I can stand in this honorable House and rip apart every bill that comes before me in opposition, because I also did it when I was over there. And as I listened to Senator Wenner, I was really encouraged by him, by the absolute research that he had conducted and the obvious, genuine interest and concern that Senator Wenner has for the issue of abiding by our laws, running government in an accountable and transparent fashion, and in regards to where the CIP sits, okay, to ensuring that this country is saved from the obvious risks of running a program like this. And that is the same lens through which I saw that 2013 piece of legislation. I'm getting goosebumps. You're not in my clothes. You understand? And in 2013, Madam President and people of Antigua and Barbuda, Senator Wenner was 11. Senator Wenner was 11 years old in primary school, short pants. Don't even know what's happening in this honorable House. And this is why when we come here, it's not a folly, because 11 short years later, or how much years we got now? 13 years later, look at the havoc that has been reaped on this country because of that piece of legislation and the poor handling and management of the CIP legislation. And he has come now, 13 years later, from a youngster, reaping the repercussions, right? And in here to defend it. That's where I want to start. That is where I want to start. When I sat over there, when this piece of legislation came to the Honorable House initially in 2013, and, you know, before I go there, I want to say that in 1994, Malaika Parker was 16 years old, as we're talking about, you know, actions and impact on nations and people. Because today, we already have visa-free restrictions. Well, we already have visa restrictions imposed upon us by the United States. It's not a folly. This is not a proactive amendment for people to still come here Madam President, the United States, Antigua and Barbudans, and those of you who hold an Antigua and Barbudan passport knows that the United States cited the mismanagement of the Citizenship by Investment program as the reason.
Madam President, I rise on a point of order. Madam President, I note that Senator Malaika is indicating that the United States government would have mentioned that it's as a result of the mismanagement of the CIP program why it is that we have visa restrictions. And I have no proof or knowledge of that. I would like her to indicate where exactly she got that information, Madam President, because that is not true, Madam President.
Yes, Senator Parker, where is that source? Can you bring it up for us?
It is in the declaration. Madam President, it is in the declaration where the U.S. imposed the visa restrictions on this country and cited CIP. That is public knowledge.
No, you said the mismanagement of the CIP program. You said that, Senator.
So they imposed they cited the CIP.
You can't ask me that question. You're the one that said so. You said that the U.S. government has imposed restrictions based on. Whose phone is that? Second one for the afternoon. Whose phone is that? Just say whose phone now? Somebody's upstairs? Yeah, I still want to see your face. Whose phone? Former Senator Lake, is you? Officers, find out who's up there that ringing off the phone. We all want to go home, you know. But you let me know, because they're going to report to us on the next occasion, like Senator Parker that had her phone go off a while ago, as to where their contributions are going in terms of the charities. So the next Senate meeting, we'll hear from the person up there and Senator Parker. But Senator Parker, you're the one that said that it was as a result of mismanagement. Leader of government business? Leader of government business? Senator Gavaya? I'm saying leader of government business. You're not accustomed to that. So, Senator Gavaya, yeah, give me the chance to. Yes, so I would like you to point out where that is quoted, Senator Parker, mismanagement of CIP.
Madam President, I withdraw that language.
Thank you.
And I will use the language.
Thank you.
That the U.S. government used. Because the U.S. cited certain features of the Citizenship by Investment program, which they felt created security and identity verification concerns.
And you're reading from, for the purpose of Hansard?
Madam President, I'll move on. I withdraw it.
Madam President, I rise on a point of order, Madam President. Madam President, Senator Parker, I'm on a point of order. Senator Parker took up her phone and she read, and she's not given us the exact sites or the evidence from which she is mentioning her statement in this Honorable House, Madam President, and we would like to follow the paper or the document, whatever you're indicating your information from. You do not have it in this Honorable House, Madam President, through you to be circulated to us. So I would like to follow on my phone, just as you're doing, so I'd like you to share the website. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I don't know if you heard the part that she said she withdrew it.
Exactly. She withdrew it and she continued. Exactly.
No, I didn't hear. Listen, man. It's 6:26 p.m. I'm not in. I hear the woman say she withdraw them. Senator Gavaya and Senator Hughes, the leaders, please set the example. It is my hearing that makes the difference. I heard Senator Parker say she's withdrawing the statement. The last statement, she withdraw it. She's withdrawing it. Senator Parker, proceed. This is your presentation, right? Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll move on. In 1994, I was 16 years old and very well awake to social and political affairs in Antigua and Barbuda, despite my young age. And I remember the Bill Chung passport affairs, which happened at that time, at the ripe age of 16 for me. That is when the issue of the illicit sale of Antiguan and Barbudan passport was thrust to the national stage. Our international reputation was called into question. There was investigations that had to be commissioned under the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party when the special envoy appointed by the then Foreign Minister, Lester Bird, Special Envoy Bill Chung, was selling Antiguan and Barbudan passports primarily to Chinese people. And I want to say that that is when my consciousness, my patriotism around what the value of this passport meant was awakened in such a visceral way, as I believe was the consciousness and the patriotism of many Antiguans and Barbudans at the time in 1994. Okay? Senator Werner was but a thought. Okay? And so many people may not even have an appreciation for the uproar that that caused and the just peeling off of skin for the Antiguan and Barbudan person, the marches, the this, and the absolute effort that was extended to get answers as to why our passport was being sold, etc. And so I admit that there was some ideological, gap in me moving to this idea of selling our passport, but I was movable. I was indeed movable. I wanted to be moved, convince me. So I even appreciate that when the United Progressive Party passed the bill back then in 2013, it did so with a certain level of consciousness. It wanted to properly systematize, legalize, have scrutiny, transparency, and all of those things attached to this idea of selling citizenship. And at the time, you couldn't even say selling passport and selling citizenship, right? But that is ostensibly what it was. So the government back then, in its wisdom, would have built in a certain number of safeguards into the legislation. Okay? And Senator Werner would have taken the time to show how much of that, especially the most important ones, to protect the legislation and to protect the people and to protect our passport, that was systematically stripped away from the bill. So that by 2017, after the UPP would have demitted office in 2014, in quick time, okay, the Canadian government could have revoked our visa-free access to Canada, Madam President, in quick time. So it didn't take long for this government to get to work in stripping out and violating and perpetrating some of the lawless acts that Senator Wenner would have mentioned in his presentation. It was almost immediate. And even after the government of Canada, one of our greatest allies, as a fellow nation of the Commonwealth, took visa-free access from the people of this country, that government in office, this Labour Party government, did not press brakes. They did not press brakes on dismantling that piece of legislation, which I thought at the time was even inadequate when it came to this transactional nature of the passport. I thought it was inadequate. And so when this thing has come up now, I went back to my notes, to my very thorough notes and my research that I did in 2013. I still have my papers in my office at home. And I won't go through all of it, but I can say that there were some key things that I felt was even deficient in the bill back then. Okay? First of all, I thought that we needed, if we were going on that road, to highlight more the investment part of that act. We needed to kick it up and make it an investment bill, an investment in Antigua, and through the investment you get the CIP, you get the passport. And we know that the bill has, 3 entryways. And so the straight sale, which is what we know was going to obtain and what I feared would be what obtained, I felt that the legislation itself should have greater emphasis on the investment option and make that option more attractive. I also thought that the due diligence was not enough. I also was in agreement. I thought the due diligence was not enough. I accepted that there was going to be parliamentary oversight. Okay? But I felt that we needed a longer residency requirement, and that if we were pushing the investment aspect of the bill, then the residency issue would be a non-issue. I was not comfortable, as I stated, with the due diligence mechanisms that were there. I did not also like, as I stated, the straight sale. I also, in my research, had looked at the St. Kitts operation, which we all know St. Kitts have one of the oldest CIP programs in the world. Okay, and at that time, I think it was 30 years old when we were doing this in 2013. And I saw how much confusion and issues and allegations of corruption that plagued the CIP in St. Kitts, etc. And I felt like we needed to do more to avoid that in our piece of legislation. And lastly, I felt at the time that this was going to be temporary. CIP would not last, and I thought that the monies collected from CIP should be purpose-driven, should be ring-fenced, and should be made to invest in the country so that at the end of it, we don't have risk, we're not dealing with consequences, and we don't have anything tangible to show. Madam President, I think it is a sorry day when we are standing here this afternoon trying to convince this nation that the amendments to this piece of legislation signifies proactivity by this government, that my colleagues on the other side kept saying, we are not being reactive. I've heard that word so many times. We are not being reactive. While being reactive, we are not debating this legislation this afternoon, Madam President, because this government respects the rule of law in relation to the CIP. Senator Buena has presented the evidence of that. We are not debating this bill and all of the new auditing requirements in the bill because this government is a fan of audits, or particularly auditing the CIP. Because as the senator stated, the audit requirement was there in the original bill.